Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. My name is Frank Bennett, and I'm 65 years old. This is the story of something that happened to me in the summer of 2022, an experience that changed my life forever. I've been a park ranger in the vast Ozark National Forest in Arkansas for over 3 decades. It's a job that keeps me connected to nature, far from the bustling city life, which suits me just fine. My days were usually filled with patrolling trails, helping lost hikers, and observing wildlife. But that summer, everything changed. It was a crisp morning in late June when it all began. I was at the ranger station, sipping my coffee and catching up with my colleague Mitch Hawkins. Mitch had just returned from a 2-week vacation in the Rockies, and we were swapping stories when our radios crackled to life. A group of hikers had stumbled upon an abandoned campsite deep in the forest, well off the marked trails. Found deserted campsites wasn't uncommon, but something about this report made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Mitch and I loaded up our gear and headed out in our trusty Jeep. The drive along the winding dirt roads was familiar. The dense canopy of oak and hickory trees created a tunnel of green above us. We parked at the Cedar Creek trailhead and began our hike. The forest was unusually quiet that day, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call breaking the silence. After about an hour of hiking, we reached the reported site. What we found made my stomach churn. The campsite looked like it had been hit by a tornado. A tent lay collapsed and torn, its contents spilled across the forest floor. The food containers were strewn about, some half-eaten and others unopened. All belongings, clothes, books, camera were scattered in a wide radius around the central area. Jesus, Mitch muttered, crouching down to examine a backpack. Wallet's still here, Frank? Who leaves without their wallet? I scanned the area, a sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. Someone in a big hurry, I replied. Let's check the immediate surroundings. They might still be nearby. We split up, keeping within shouting distance of each other. I moved towards the edge of the clearing where the trees grew denser and the shadows deeper. There was a palpable sense of being watched, and I tried to chalk it up to nerves. After about 20 minutes of searching, Mitch called out, Frank, found something. I made my way over to where he stood, holding up a hiking boot. It was caked in mud and looked like it had been violently torn off someone's foot. Christ, I breathed. Maybe they got injured. Mitch nodded grimly. We should call for a search team. This doesn't look good. We radioed in our findings and headed back to the Jeep, the forest seeming to close in around us as we walked. That night, a full search and rescue team combed the area but found nothing, no tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing to explain the hasty departure. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and follow-up investigations. The campers were identified as the Johnsons, a family of 4 from Little Rock who had been reported missing by relatives when they failed to return from their trip. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't find any trace of them beyond that abandoned campsite. A week later, we received another disturbing call. This time it was from a couple who had been camping near the same area. They reported strange noises at night and, more alarmingly, finding their campsite ransacked in the morning. The husband mentioned seeing a dark figure watching them from the tree line just before dawn. Mitch and I geared up once again, this time carrying our service firearms and extra supplies. As we hiked towards the couple's campsite, the forest felt different. The usual chorus of birds and insects was absent, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. We reached the site in the late afternoon. At the first glance, it was a scene of chaos. Gear strewn about, food containers ripped open, the palpable sense of panic lingering in the air. We decided to set up a temporary base and stay the night, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever had spooked the couple. Night fell, and the forest grew impossibly dark. Mitch and I took turns keeping watch, but nothing happened until just after midnight. I was on duty when I heard it, a rustling in the underbrush, followed by a low guttural sound that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. "Mitch," I whispered, shaking him awake. "You hear that?" He was instantly alert, grabbing his flashlight and gun. The rustling grew louder, coming from the direction of the densest part of the forest. We moved closer, our lights trained on the source of the noise. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a gaunt frame and skin that looked almost translucent in the beam of our flashlights. Its eyes reflected the light with an unnatural, silvery sheen. "What the hell is that?" Mitch muttered, raising his gun. Before I could respond, the creature lunged at us with inhuman speed. Mitch fired, but it barely seemed to notice the impact. It knocked him to the ground, clawing at him with long, bony fingers. I raised my gun and fired twice, the shots echoing through the silent forest. The creature let out a high-pitched wail that sent shivers down my spine. It released Mitch and fled back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. Mitch was shaken, but mostly unharmed, with some scratches and bruises. We decided to abandon the campsite immediately and head back to the station. As we hiked, we kept our guns ready, eyes constantly scanning the forest for any sign of the creature's return. Back at the station, we reported the encounter, but our supervisor, Dave, was skeptical. "You sure you didn't just see a bear?" He asked, though his tone suggested he knew as well as we did that no bear moved like that or looked so unnatural. "It wasn't a bear," Dave, Mitch insisted. This was something else, something I'd never seen before. The next few weeks were tense. We increased patrols in the area, but the creature didn't reappear. Eventually, the forest seemed to return to normal, the usual sounds of wildlife filling the air once more. But the memory of that night stayed with us, a lingering sense of unease that we couldn't shake. Then, about a month after our encounter, another report came in. A young couple, Kevin and Sarah Matthews, had gone missing while hiking in the eastern part of the forest. Their car was found parked at the Sunset Trail trailhead, but there was no sign of them beyond that. We organized a search party, combing the forest for any clues. We found their campsite on the second day of the search. It was abandoned, like the others, with signs of a hasty departure, but no indication of where they might have gone. It was as if the forest had swallowed them up, leaving no trace. Mitch and I continued our patrols, but the sense of dread grew stronger with each passing day. We were no longer just park rangers. We were men haunted by the unknown, by a creature that defied explanation. Then, one evening as the sun was setting, we received a call from the station. The local hunter, Jim Parsons, had reported seeing a strange creature near Black Fork Mountain, not far from where the Matthews had gone missing. We grabbed our gear and headed out, determined to put an end to this nightmare. The drive was silent. Both of us were lost in our thoughts. We reached the area just as darkness fell, the forest cloaked in deep shadows. We moved cautiously, our flashlights sweeping across the trees and underbrush. Jim had marked the spot where he'd seen the creature on his GPS, and we made our way there, every sense on high alert. Suddenly we heard it, that same low, guttural sound that had haunted my dreams for weeks. We turned our lights in the direction of the noise, and there it was, standing at the edge of a small clearing, watching us with those eerie, glowing eyes. "Spread out," I whispered to Mitch. "We need to corner it." We moved slowly, trying to flank the creature. It stood unnaturally still, almost as if it were waiting for us. Then, with a burst of speed that seemed impossible for its gangly frame, it charged at Mitch. He fired, but the creature was too quick. It knocked him down, its claws slashing at his chest. I raised my gun and fired 3 times in rapid succession, hitting it square in the torso. The creature let out a piercing scream and fell to the ground, its body twitching and convulsing. I rushed to Mitch's side. He was bleeding from several deep gashes, but he was alive. We radioed for help and waited, keeping our guns trained on the creature's body. It didn't move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly dead, just waiting. Help arrived within the hour, and we were taken back to the station. Mitch was patched up and sent to the hospital for further treatment. I gave my report, describing the creature in as much detail as I could. The creature's body was taken away for examination, but I never heard what became of it. It was as if the whole incident was swept under the rug, filed away in some dusty cabinet labeled unexplained. In the weeks that followed, the forest seemed to return to normal. Hikers and campers returned, unaware of the terror that had stalked these woods. But I knew better. There was something out there, something that didn't belong in our world. I continued my work as a park ranger, but I was always on edge, always watching. Mitch eventually left the job, unable to shake the fear that had taken root that night. I understood, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. This forest was my home, and I felt a responsibility to protect it and the people who came to enjoy its beauty. Years have passed since that summer, and the memory of the creature has faded for most, but not for me. Every now and then I catch a glimpse of something in the shadows, flicker of movement that sends my heart racing. I know it's still out there, waiting, watching, and I know that one day it will return. The Ozark National Forest changed me, made me wary, always on guard. But it's also my home, and I will do whatever it takes to keep it safe, even if it means facing that creature again. Because some things can't be explained, can't be understood, they just are. And all we can do is be ready when they come for us. As I sit here in my cabin watching the sunset over the mountains, I can't help but wonder what else might be hiding in the depths of these ancient forests. What other secrets does this land hold? I might never know the full truth of what happened that summer, but I do know this: the world is stranger and more mysterious than we can imagine, and sometimes the best we can do is stand our ground and face the unknown with courage and determination. So if you ever find yourself hiking through the Ozark National Forest and you feel a chill run down your spine or hear a strange noise in the distance, remember my story. And remember that not all that wanders in the woods is lost. Some things are right where they want to be, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their domain. Stay safe out there and keep your eyes open. You never know what might be watching from the shadows. My name is Stanley Hayes, and I am 72 years old. The story I'm about to tell you happened about 5 years ago when I was working as a park ranger in Whispering Pines National Forest. Now I know what you're thinking. Being a park ranger sounds like a dream job, right? Leisurely strolls through the woods, rescuing the occasional kitten from a tree, and basking in the beauty of nature. Now let me tell you, it's not all sunshine and wildflowers. There are things out there in the wilderness, strange and unexplainable things that no one warns you about when you sign up for the job. But before I get into all that, let me tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in a small town called Millbrook, nestled in the heart of Arkansas. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the biggest excitement was the annual fall festival. My childhood home was a modest 2-story house on the outskirts of town, backing up to a dense forest that seemed to stretch on forever. From as far back as I can remember, I was drawn to the outdoors. While all the kids were glued to their TV sets or video games, I was out exploring the woods behind our house, building forts and pretending to be a great explorer. My dad, Robert Hayes, was an avid hunter and outdoorsman. He taught me everything he knew about tracking, survival skills, and respecting nature. Some of my fondest memories are of the two of us trudging through the woods at dawn, watching the forest come alive around us. As I grew older, my love for the outdoors only intensified. It seemed natural to turn that passion into a career, and being a park ranger felt like the perfect fit. It wasn't about hunting or conquering nature, but about preserving it and helping others experience its wonder. So after high school, I enrolled in a forestry program at the state university and never looked back. Fast forward a few decades, and there I was, Senior Park Ranger Stanley Hayes, proud protector of Whispering Pines National Forest. It was a vast expanse of wilderness, covering over 1.2 million acres of diverse ecosystems. From towering pine forests to hidden waterfalls and deep, mysterious caves, Whispering Pines had it all. And for nearly 30 years, it had been my home away from home. The events I'm about to recount took place in mid-September, just as summer was giving way to fall. The weather was starting to cool down, bringing with it that crisp, invigorating air that always made the forest feel more alive somehow. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashing the canopy with hints of gold and red. It was my favorite time of year, a time when the forest seemed to hold its breath caught between seasons. On that particular day, I was on a routine patrol, just a standard check of the northern trails. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, a mixture I'd come to love over the years. It's the kind of smell that makes you feel alive, connected to something bigger than yourself. I had my usual gear with me, a radio clipped to my belt, a well-stocked first aid kit in my backpack, and my old trusty compass. I wasn't armed that day, never felt the need to be, honestly. In all my years as a ranger, the most dangerous thing I'd encountered was particularly ornery raccoon with a taste for campers' snacks. The day started normal enough. I checked a couple of campsites, making sure no one was leaving trash behind or disturbing the local wildlife. I chatted with a few hikers, giving them tips on the best trails and reminding them of the park rules. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I loved my job so much, being out in nature, helping people, and feeling like I was making a difference, however small. Around midday, I decided to head towards an old, less-traveled path in the northern part of the park. This trail had been closed off for a while due to some fallen trees, but it was on my list to check if the work crew had cleared it yet. As I made my way down the overgrown path, I noticed something odd. The usual symphony of forest sounds, birds chirping, leaves rustling, small animals scurrying about, was conspicuously absent. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I shrugged it off at first, figuring it was just one of those weird natural lulls that happen sometimes. But as I continued down the path, the silence began to feel oppressive, almost unnatural. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After about an hour of walking, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. There, nestled in a small clearing, was an old cabin. Now, I'd been working these woods for nearly 3 decades. I knew every inch of this forest like the back of my hand. But this cabin, it wasn't on any map, and I'd never seen it before in all my years here. The structure was clearly abandoned. Its wood gray and rotting, windows shattered and empty. Vines had started to reclaim it, creeping up the walls and across the sagging roof. It had an eerie vibe about it, like something out of an old ghost story. But more than scared, I was curious. In my experience, abandoned structures in the middle of nowhere often held interesting stories and sometimes valuable historical artifacts. I approached the cabin cautiously, my boots crunching on the carpet of dead leaves that surrounded it. The porch creaked ominously under my weight as I made my way to the front door. It was hanging off its hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. I pushed it open, wincing at the loud groan of rusted metal. The interior of the cabin was a study in decay. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and cobwebs stretched from corner to corner like a macabre tapestry. The air was stale and musty, carrying the unmistakable scent of abandonment and rot. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust and casting long shadows across the floor. Despite its dilapidated state, I could see that the cabin had once been someone's home. There was an old iron stove in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs in the center of the room, and the remains of what looked like a bed frame against the far wall. But what caught my eye was an old leather-bound book sitting on the table, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. Curiosity piqued. I made my way over to the table, my footsteps echoing in the empty room. I picked up the book carefully, half expecting it to crumble to dust in my hands. But despite its age, it seemed relatively well preserved. I opened it gently, revealing page after page of handwritten entries. It was a journal. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes widened. The journal was filled with strange entries about local legends and sightings of a creature called the Vernede. The descriptions were vague and often contradictory, but it was clear that whoever wrote this believed wholeheartedly in its existence. One entry caught my eye. May 15, 1952. Saw it again today, the Vernede. It was down by Whispering Creek, just at dusk. Tall as a tree, it had limbs like branches and skin pale as moonlight. It marched so fast, silent as a shadow. I tried to follow, but it vanished into the mist. I know folks think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. The Vernede is real, and it's out there watching us. The last entry in the journal mentioned something about a hidden cave deep in the forest, where the Vernede supposedly lived. I couldn't help but chuckle, thinking it was just the ramblings of some old hermit with too much time on his hands and an overactive imagination. Still, something about the journal intrigued me. I decided to pocket it, figuring it'd make for an interesting read later. As I stepped back outside, the silence hit me again. It was even more pronounced now, an almost tangible weight pressing down on me. The shadows seemed longer and darker somehow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided it was time to head back to the main trail and call it a day. That's when I heard it. A rustling noise coming from the dense underbrush to my left. It wasn't the normal sound of a small animal moving through the leaves. This was different, bigger. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Anyone there?" There was no answer, just more rustling louder this time. I moved closer, my heart starting to beat a little faster. As I approached, the noise stopped abruptly. Everything went still again. I stood there for a moment, scanning the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just trees and shadows. Struggling it off as an animal, probably a deer. I turned to leave. That's when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A flash of movement, something tall and gaunt slipping between the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it away. A trick of the light, a shadow, maybe a bear standing on its hind legs. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone out here. Suddenly I backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the spot where I'd seen the movement. I reached for my radio, intending to call for backup, but all I got was static. The signal was dead. Of course it was. I picked up my pace, trying to stay calm, but feeling panic start to rise in my chest. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Just trees and lengthening shadows as the sun began to dip towards the horizon. By the time I reached the main trail, I was practically jogging. That's when I saw it again, standing at the edge of the trail, partially obscured by the trees. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with long, gangly limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were dark and hollow, staring right at me. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was like something out of a nightmare. Like the creature from the journal had stepped right off the page and into reality. I took a step back and it moved, matching my pace. That was all it took. I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my life. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps unnaturally quiet for something so large. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare stop. I could feel it getting closer. Up ahead I saw the ranger station, a small building where we kept supplies and a more powerful radio. I pushed myself harder, praying I'd make it. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, locking it for good measure. I grabbed the radio and tried to call for help, but it was still nothing but static. I cursed, banging it against the table in frustration. That's when I heard the scratching at the door. It was here, and it wanted in. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything to defend myself with. There was an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall, a relic from the early days of the park. I grabbed it, checking to see if it was loaded. 2 rounds. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The scratching turned into pounding, the door shaking on its hinges. I backed up, aiming the rifle at the door, my hands trembling. The wood splintered and the door burst open. The creature stepped inside, its hollow eyes locked on me. I fired, the sound deafening in the small room. The bullet hit it in the shoulder, but it barely flinched. I fired again, this time aiming for its head. The creature staggered back, letting out a high-pitched shriek that made my blood run cold. It wasn't dead, but it was hurt. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I bolted out the back door, running from my truck parked nearby. I jumped in and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, speeding down the dirt road. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the creature chasing me, but there was nothing. Just the dark road behind me and the deepening shadows of the forest. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, my heart still pounding in my chest. I made it back to the main ranger station and reported what happened, but none believed me. They said I must have imagined it, that it was probably just a bear or something. I knew better. I'd seen the Varnid, and I knew it was real. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow, dark eyes staring at me. I quit my job a week later, couldn't stand being in the forest anymore. I moved to the city, figuring there was safety in numbers. Years have passed, but I've never forgotten. I still have that journal tucked away in a drawer. Sometimes, late at night, I'll take it out and read those entries, trying to make sense of what happened. But the truth is, I'll probably never know. The forest holds its secrets close, and some things are better left unknown. I've told this story a few times, but no one ever believes me. They laugh, say I've got a vivid imagination. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was just a bear, and years of solitude in the woods had finally gotten to me. But deep down I know what I saw, and I know I'm not the only one. People go missing in those woods all the time, and not all of them are ever found. I still get nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat with the memory of those hollow eyes burned into my mind. I've tried to move on, to forget, but it's always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One night not too long ago, I was watching the news and saw a report about a hiker who went missing in Whispering Pine. They found his campsite, but no sign of him. His friend said he just vanished without a trace. The authorities chalked it up to a wild animal attack, but I know better. The forest has its own rules, its own ways of dealing with those who venture too deep. And the Ranid? It's part of that. It's that embodiment of the wild, untamed spirit of the woods. A reminder that no matter how much we think we've conquered nature, there are still things out there beyond our understanding. As I sit here, an old man now, far from the forests of my youth, I can't help but wonder, was it real? Did I really see what I think I saw? Or was it all just a product of an overactive imagination and too many years alone in woods? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but one thing's for certain, I'll never look at the forest the same way again. And neither, I suspect, will you. The weeks following my encounter in Whispering Pines were some of the most difficult of my life. I found myself jumping at every shadow, startling at every unexpected noise. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, plagued as I was by vivid nightmares of hollow eyes and reaching branch-like limbs. My colleagues at the ranger station treated me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I'd lost it. Howard Stanley, gone off the deep end after too many years alone in the woods. I couldn't blame them, really. If someone had come to me with a story like mine, I probably would have reacted the same way. But I knew what I had seen. The image of the Vernard was burned into my mind, impossible to forget or explain away. I threw myself into research, spending hours poring over local folklore and legends, searching for any mention of a creature that matched what I had encountered. The journal I had found in the cabin became my constant companion, its weathered pages offering tantalizing hints but no concrete answers. It was during this time that I met Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, a professor of folklore and mythology at the State University. I had reached out to her department, hoping to find someone who might take my story seriously. To my surprise, she agreed to meet with me. Dr. Blackwood was a small, wiry woman with sharp green eyes and a shock of silver hair. She listened to my story without interruption, her face betraying no emotion. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, studying me intently. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, "I've had many stories in my years of study, but yours is something different." I felt a glimmer of hope. "You believe me?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I believe that you believe what you saw, and I believe that there are things in this world that defy our understanding. What I can tell you is that your story bears striking similarities to legends I have encountered in my research." Over the next few hours, Dr. Blackwood shared with me tales from various cultures, Native American legends of forest spirits, European folklore about creatures that lurked in the deep woods, even modern urban legends about mysterious beings in national parks. The details varied, but the core remained the same: tall, otherworldly creatures that seemed to be guardians or embodiments of the wilderness itself. The name Vanad, she mused, I haven't encountered before, but the concept, that's as old as humanity's relationship with the wild. As fascinating as our discussion was, it left me with more questions than answers. Dr. Blackwood promised to look into it further and keep in touch. But as I left her office that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something far bigger and more ancient than I could comprehend. The next few months were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to return to work at Whispering Pines. The very thought of those dense woods filled me with a primal fear I couldn't shake. I took an extended leave of absence, citing stress and health concerns. My superiors were understanding, if a bit confused. I had always been the steady one, a reliable old-timer who never took a sick day. Now I was a shell of my former self. I found myself into research, spending countless hours in libraries and online forums searching for any information I could find about creatures like the Vernard. I even reached out to other park rangers across the country, discreetly asking if they had ever encountered anything unusual in their forests. Most of the responses I got were polite dismissals or concerned inquiries about my well-being, but there were a few, very few, that gave me pause. A ranger in the Pacific Northwest who spoke of shadow people glimpsed between the trees. Another in the Appalachians who described finding inexplicable enormous footprints that disappeared into solid rock faces. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be proven, but enough to keep the embers of my conviction burning. It was during this time that the nightmares started to evolve. No longer was I simply reliving my encounter in the woods. Now I found myself lost in vast primordial forests, the trees towering so high their tops were lost in mist, and always I could feel eyes upon me. And not malevolent precisely, but utterly alien, watching, waiting, judging. I would wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, the scent of pine and damp earth so strong that I could almost believe I was back in Whispering Pines. It was after one such night that I made my decision. I had to go back. The drive back to Whispering Pines was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every mile closer made my palms sweat and my heart race. But I knew I had to face this, had to know for sure if what I had experienced was, or if I had finally cracked after all my years in the wilderness. I arrived at the ranger station early in the morning before most of the staff had arrived. Jake, the night shift guy, was just about to leave when I walked in. He did a double take when he saw me. "Stanley, what are you doing here, man? Thought you were on leave." I forced a smile. "Just came to pick up some things I left behind. Mind if I grab my old gear?" Jake shrugged. "Sure thing. Good to see you, Stanley. You've been missed around here." As I gathered my old packing gear, a wave of nostalgia hit me. This had been my life for so long. The familiar weight of the pack on my shoulders, the creak of my well-worn boots. For a moment I was tempted to just slip back into my old routine, to pretend that nothing had ever happened. But I couldn't. I know what I had to do. I left a note for the chief ranger explaining that I was going to do one last patrol of old reeds. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped out onto the trail and into the forest. The woods were as beautiful as I remembered, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, the air rich with the scent of pine and wildflowers. For the first few hours, I almost managed to convince myself that everything was normal, just another day on the job. But as I approached the area where I had encountered the Venetid, the atmosphere began to change. The bird songs grew fewer and farther between. The air seemed to thicken, making each breath a conscious effort. And that feeling of being watched returned, prickling at the back of my neck. I found the old cabin easily enough. It looked even more decrepit than I remembered, as if it had aged decades in the months since I had last seen it. The door hung open, swaying gently in a breeze. I couldn't feel. With trembling hands, I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The interior was exactly as I remembered it. Dusty, cobweb-covered, frozen in time. But the journal was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper yellowed with age. On it, in spidery handwriting, was a single sentence. "The Vranid watches, the Vranid waits, the forest remembers." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't told anyone about the journal. How could this be here? That's when I heard it, a rustling from outside, too big to be a small animal. My heart began to race. Slowly, feeling as if I was moving through molasses, I turned towards the door. There, framed in the entrance, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, with limbs like gnarled branches and skin as pale as birch bark. Its eyes, dark hollows in its face, fixed on me with an intelligence that was utterly alien, yet undeniably present. The Vranid. For a long moment, we stared at each other. I waited for the fear to come, for the panic that had gripped me during our last encounter. Instead, I felt calm, as if I was in the presence of something ancient and powerful, yes, but inherently malevolent. Slowly, deliberately, the Vranid raised one long-fingered hand and pointed deeper into the forest. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it turned and walked away, its form seeming to melt into the shadows between the trees. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of civilization and never look back. But a larger part, the part that had called me to the forest in the first place, all those years ago, knew that I had to follow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the cabin and into the deepening shadows of the forest. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truths I might uncover, I knew that my life would never be the same. The forest had called and I had no choice but to answer. As I ventured deeper into the unknown, following the path the Vrennied had indicated, I couldn't help but feel that I was walking into something far bigger than myself. The forest around me seemed to pulse with an energy I had never noticed before, as if it were alive and aware in a way I never understood. The trail I followed was barely visible, more of a game path than anything made by human feet. It led me through dense underbrush, over babbling brooks, and past trees so ancient their trunks were wider than my arm span. All the while I felt watched, guided, headed towards some unknown destination. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, I found myself in a part of whispering pines I had never seen before. The trees here were different, older, more gnarled, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Moss hung in thick curtains and the ground was soft and spongy underfoot. And then, quite suddenly, I emerged into a clearing. In its center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk easily 20 feet in diameter. Its branches spread out in all directions, creating a canopy that seemed to encompass the entire clearing, but it was what was at the base of the tree that took my breath away. There, nestled between two enormous roots, was a cave entrance. It was perfectly round, as if it had been carved by human hands, but I knew instinctively that no human tool had shaped this opening. Runes or symbols of some kind were etched around the entrance, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to pulse in time with the beating of my heart. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The Vrennied stood at the edge of the clearing, its tall form blending seamlessly with the ancient trees. But it wasn't alone. As I watched, other figures emerged from the forest. Some were tall and spindly like the Vrennied. Others were squat and gnarled, like ancient tree stumps come to life. Some seemed to be made of mist and shadow, while others looked as solid as rocks and earth. I formed a loose circle around the clearing, their otherworldly eyes all fixed on me. I should have been terrified, but somehow I wasn't. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if everything, the trees, the earth, these strange beings, even the very air itself, was waiting for something. The Vrennied stepped forward, its movement fluid and graceful despite its gangly form. It raised one long arm, pointing towards the cave entrance. The message was clear. This was why I had been brought here. This was what I needed to see. With a deep breath, I stepped towards the cave. As I approached, the symbols around the entrance began to glow brighter. I could feel a thrumming energy emanating from within, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the assembled beings. The Vrennied nodded, a surprisingly human gesture from such an alien creature. Taking another deep breath, I ducked my head and stepped into the cave. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world seemed to shift. The air became thick and heavy, filled with the scent of loam and ancient things. The walls of the cave were smooth, almost polished, and covered in more of those strange, glowing symbols. As I ventured deeper, the cave opened up into a vast chamber. And there in the center was something that defied description. It was like a pool of liquid starlight, swirling and pulsing with colors I had no names for. Images flashed across its surface: forests, mountains, deserts, oceans. I saw creatures both familiar and utterly alien, civilizations rising and falling, the earth changing and evolving over eons. I understood then in a moment of clarity what I was seeing. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. This was the heart of the forest. Not just whispering pines, but all forests, all wild places. It was the wellspring of life itself, the source of the magic and mystery that humans had sensed in nature since the dawn of time. And the Vrennied, the other beings I had seen, they were its guardians, different spirits of the natural world, preserving and protecting this vital force from those who would exploit and destroy it. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the swirling visions of the pool. It could have been minutes or days, but eventually I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. The Vernon stood beside me, its hollow eyes somehow conveying a depth of emotion I hadn't thought possible. Slowly, reverently, it reached out and touched the surface of the pool. The liquid light clung to its fingers, and as I watched, it turned to me and gently pressed its hand to my forehead. In that moment, everything changed. Knowledge flooded into me. The language of trees, the songs of stones, the whispered secrets of the wind. I saw the world as the Variant saw it, as a vast, interconnected web of life and energy. I understood the vital role that places like Whispering Pines played in maintaining the balance of the world, and I understood my part in it all. Why I had been chosen, why I had been allowed to see these wonders. I was to be a bridge, a translator between the world of humans and the ancient spirits of nature. It was a responsibility both thrilling and terrifying. When the vision faded, I found myself back in the clearing, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. The other beings were gone, but the Veronide remained. It nodded to me one last time, then turned and melted into the forest. I made my way back to the ranger station in a daze, my mind reeling from all that I had experienced. I knew that my life had irrevocably changed, that I could never go back to being the man I was before. In the years since that night, I've done my best to fulfill the role given to me. I returned to my job as a park ranger, but with a new purpose. I've become an advocate for conservation, using my experiences to help others understand the true value and wonder of our wild places. I've worked with scientists and researchers, bridging the gap between empirical knowledge and the ancient wisdom I was given. It hasn't been easy. Many still don't believe me, think I'm just a crazy old man with wild stories. But that's okay. I know the truth and I do what I can to protect it. And sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is full, I'll venture deep into the woods of Whispering Pines, there in the shadowy spaces between the trees. You'll catch glimpses of tall, otherworldly figures, a reminder that the world is far more vast and mysterious than we can imagine. The wild places still hold secrets beyond our understanding. So the next time you're in a forest, and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that sense of being watched, remember my story. Remember that there are guardians in the wild places, ancient and powerful. They're watching, waiting, protecting the heart of nature itself. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, they'll choose to reveal themselves to you too. But be warned, once you see the truth, there's no going back. The forest will forever call to you, its secrets whispering on the wind, inviting you to delve deeper into the mysteries of the natural world. It's a call that, once heard, can never be forgotten. And me? I'm just grateful for the glimpse I've been given, for the role I've been asked to play. I'm Stanley Hayes, former park ranger, now guardian of secrets and teller of tales. And this is my story. My name is George Wallace, and I am 68 years old. This is a true story about something that happened to me a few years back when I was working as a park ranger at Sleeping Giant State Park in Connecticut. I'd been a ranger for nearly 20 years at that point. I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for what happened that autumn. It was a chilly October evening, and I had just finished a long day of patrolling the trails and making sure the campgrounds were clear of litter. The park was quiet, as it usually was this time of year, with only a few campers braving the cold nights. I was looking forward to a warm meal and maybe a beer or two before heading to bed. Around 8 p.m., I got a call on my radio. It was Sarah, one of the newer rangers. She sounded panicked, her voice shaky. She told me there was something weird going on at the northwest edge of the park, near the old quarry. Sarah was usually level-headed, so her distress worried me. I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and my old Glock 19, just in case. I drove my Jeep through the winding park roads, the headlights cutting through the dense fog that had settled in. I could see the old quarry silhouette in the distance, a gaping wound in the side of the mountain. As I got closer, I noticed Sarah's Jeep parked haphazardly on the side of the road, its lights still on. But Sarah was nowhere to be seen. I called out for her, but there was no response. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. I started to get a bad feeling in my gut. I decided to check the quarry, thinking maybe Sarah had gone inside to investigate something. The place had a reputation for being dangerous, especially at night. As I approached the entrance to the quarry, I noticed something odd. There were strange markings on the ground, like someone had been dragging something heavy. The marks led into the quarry, and despite every instinct telling me to turn back, I followed them. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of moss and wet stone. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the rocky walls. I called out again, louder this time. "Sarah, are you in here?" No answer. I moved deeper into the quarry, my hand on my gun. The dragging marks led to a narrow crevice in the rock face, a place I'd never noticed before. The opening was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed forward. The crevice opened up into a small cavern. The air here was different, colder and with a strange metallic smell. A flashlight beam caught something reflective on the far wall. As I moved closer, I realized it was some kind of symbol etched into the rock. It looked ancient, a series of interlocking circles and lines that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I heard a faint noise like a whimper coming from deeper in the cave. I moved forward cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded a corner, I saw Sarah huddled against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. "George?" she croaked. "Thank God. We need to get out of here now." I was about to ask her what happened when I heard another sound, this one much closer. It was a low, guttural noise, almost like an animal growling, but with an unnatural metallic edge to it. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the shadows was a figure, tall and humanoid, but with features that were all wrong. Its skin seemed to shift and ripple, sometimes looking like polished metal, other times like rough stone. Its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and where its mouth should have been, there was only a dark void. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I fired my gun, the noise deafening in the confined space. The creature let out a shriek that sounded like grinding metal and lunged at me. I dodged to the side and fired again, this time hitting it square in the chest. It staggered back, but didn't fall. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the shadows, disappearing from sight. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed Sarah and we ran, stumbling through the dark cave and out into the quarry. The fog had thickened, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. We made it to my Jeep, and I practically threw Sarah into the passenger seat before jumping in myself. I floored it, driving as fast as I dared through the winding park roads. Back at the ranger station, I called for an ambulance and tried to get Sarah to tell me what happened. Between gasps for breath, she told me she had seen strange lights in the quarry and went to investigate. That's when she encountered the creature. It had chased her into the cave, where she had hidden until I found her. The ambulance arrived and they took Sarah to the hospital. I filed my report, but I knew no one would believe the truth. I barely believed it myself. Over the next few days, I searched the park for any signs of the creature, but found nothing. It was like it had vanished into thin air. Sarah recovered from her injuries, but she was never the same. She left the park service and moved to a different state, wanting to put as much distance between herself and Sleeping Giant as possible. I stayed on, but I was more cautious, always looking over my shoulder, always listening for that strange metallic sound. I never saw the creature again, but every time I passed the old quarry, I felt its presence lurking just out of sight. I started calling it the Stone Shifter, a name that seemed to fit. I did some research and found old stories, legends about strange beings that lived in the mountains, neither fully flesh nor stone. Most people dismiss them as myths, but I knew better. About a year later, I was patrolling the park when I saw a light in the distance. It was coming from the direction of the quarry. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't been back there since that night with Sarah, but something compelled me to go now. I drove as close as I could and then continued on foot, moving quietly through the trees. The light was still there, a strange, pulsing blue glow. As I got closer, I saw a figure standing near the entrance to the quarry. It was an old man, his face weathered and lined, his eyes fixed on the glowing symbol I had seen in the cave. The symbol was now visible on the rock face outside, pulsing with that eerie blue light. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked into the quarry. I followed, my hand on my gun. Inside, the air was charged with a strange energy that made my skin tingle. The old man was standing by the crevice that led to the cave, looking into it with a mixture of fear and longing. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty space. He turned to look at me, and I saw his eyes were the same glowing blue as the symbol. "They're coming back," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "The old ones are waking up." Before I could respond, there was a flash of blue light, and the old man was gone. In his place stood the stone shifter, its form rippling and changing in the pulsing light. It reached out towards me with a hand that was sometimes flesh, sometimes stone, sometimes living metal. I backed away, my heart racing. I knew I was facing something beyond my understanding, something that had been here long before humans and would likely be here long after we were gone. The stone shifter didn't advance. Instead, it seemed to be waiting, watching. I left the quarry that night and never went back. I continued working as a ranger until my retirement, but I avoided that part of the park, and I made sure others did too. The stone shifter and the mystery of the glowing symbol remained unexplained, and to keep it that way, that sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I can hear a faint metallic whisper carried on the breeze. I wonder what ancient secrets are still sleeping in the heart of the mountain, waiting to wake up. My name is Arthur Turner, and I'm 74 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been working as a park ranger at Whispering Pines State Park in northern Minnesota. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it suits me just fine. Most days, I spend my time making sure visitors follow the rules, picking up trash, and occasional helping out lost hikers. The peace and quiet of the forest feels like home to me now, but there was one day about 2 years ago when something happened that shook me to my core. It's a story I've told very few people, partly because I'm not sure anyone would believe me, and partly because I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. It was early October, and the air had that crisp chill that heralds the coming of winter. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the forest in a palette of reds, oranges, and golds. I was working the morning shift, which meant I was up before dawn, ready to start my rounds. As the sun peeked over the horizon, Pines isn't one of those big famous national parks that draws tourists from all over the country. It's a smaller, state-run affair, mostly frequented by locals who appreciate its quiet beauty and well-maintained trails. After 5 years on the job, I knew every inch of those woods like the back of my hand. Or at least I thought I did. My first task that morning was to check the perimeter fence on the north side of the park. It was about a 2-mile hike from the ranger station, but I didn't mind. The walk gave me time to wake up properly and enjoy the crisp morning air. I had my thermos of coffee in one hand and my radio in the other, ready to call in if I found any damage or signs of trespassers. As I made my way along the fence line, a thick fog began to roll in. It wasn't unusual for this time of year, but it always made me a little uneasy. The way it muffled sounds and limited visibility, it was like walking through a world of cotton wool. I was about halfway through my inspection when I noticed something odd. A section of the fence, maybe 10 feet long, was completely mangled. It wasn't just broken or cut. It looked like something had torn through it with incredible force. The metal links were twisted and bent, and there were deep gouges in the wooden posts. I frowned, examining the damage more closely. This wasn't the work of any animal I knew. Bears could do some damage, sure, but this looked more like someone had taken a giant can opener to the fence, and it didn't look like typical vandalism either. There was something deliberate about it. I keyed my radio. "Hey Marge, you there?" Marge Olson, my colleague and closest friend at the park, responded almost immediately. "Morning, Arthur. What's up?" "I found some strange damage on the north fence. Looks like something tore right through it. Any reports of unusual activity or large animal sightings?" There was a pause before Marge replied. "Negative on both counts." "You think it might be vandals?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. It doesn't look quite right for that. And I'm going to investigate a bit further. It might take me a while to get back." "Roger that, Arthur. Be careful out there and keep me posted." I clipped the radio back to my belt and took a deep breath. The sensible thing would have been to wait for backup, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the trail of destruction, hoping it would lead me to some answers. As I stepped through the mangled fence, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was colder on this side, the fog thicker somehow. The usual sounds of the forest bird song, rustling leaves, the occasional scurrying of small animals were conspicuously absent. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. I walked for about a quarter of a mile, following a trail of broken branches and disturbed earth. The fog made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead, and more than once I nearly lost the trail. But then I stumbled into a small clearing, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It was a campsite, or what remained of one. 2 tents lay in tatters, shredded beyond repair. Camping gear was strewn everywhere. Sleeping bags, backpacks, cooking equipment. And there was blood. Not a lot, but enough to know that someone had been hurt. My heart was pounding now, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. I scanned the area looking for any sign of the campers, but the clearing was deserted. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio again. "Marge, I found something. A campsite. Completely destroyed. There's blood?" Marge's voice came back, tight with concern. "Jesus. Arthur, are there any victims? Do you need me to call for backup?" I took another look around the clearing. No sign of anyone yet. Let me check for clues before we call this in. Might be nothing. "Arthur, this doesn't sound like nothing. Be careful, okay?" I promised I would, and started to examine the campsite more closely. The tents were beyond saving, but I managed to find a backpack that was mostly intact. Inside was a map of the park, some energy bars, and a wallet. The ID inside belonged to a Mark Jensen from Minneapolis. I made a mental note of the name, thinking we'd need to contact his family. As I was zipping up the backpack, something caught my eye. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the fog, was a set of tracks leading deeper into the wood. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Too large to be human, but clearly bipedal. Each print was nearly 2 feet long, with what looked like claw marks at the ends of elongated toes. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to radio for help and wait for backup. But if there were injured campers out there, every minute could count. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the tracks. The trail led me deeper into a part of the forest I'd rarely visited. The trees here were older, their gnarled branches reaching out like arthritic fingers. The fog seemed to cling to everything, turning the world into a gray, formless void. I could barely see the tracks now, relying more on intuition than sight to stay on the trail. I'm not sure how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that mist-shrouded forest. But eventually I emerged into another clearing, smaller than the first. In the center stood an enormous oak tree, its trunk easily 10 feet in diameter. The tree looked ancient, its bark gnarled and twisted into shapes that almost resembled faces. At the base of the tree, I found more blood and what looked like scraps of torn clothing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I moved closer to the tree, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. That's when I saw it. Crouched at the base of the tree was something. At first glance, it looked almost human, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized how wrong that initial impression was. The thing was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and jointed in all the wrong places. Its skin was a mottled gray, like the bark of a dead tree. It seemed to shift and ripple as if it couldn't quite decide on a solid form. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. They were huge, taking up far too much of its face, and so dark they seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. As those eyes locked onto mine, I felt a chill that went beyond mere physical cold. It was as if something fundamental had been taken from me, some essential part of my humanity stripped away in an instant. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. Then, faster than I could blink, it moved. One moment it was crouched by the tree, the next it was gone, disappearing into the forest with a speed that defied belief. The fog seemed to swallow it up, leaving no trace behind. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. It was impossible. It had to be impossible, and yet I knew with a bone-deep certainty that it had been real. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Arthur? Arthur? Come in. You've been silent for over an hour. What's going on? With trembling hands, I raised the radio to my mouth. Marge, I saw something. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't natural. I'm heading back now. Arthur, you're scaring me. Just come back to the station. Well, call in the authorities and sort this out. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth or tracking. I just wanted to get as far away from that clearing as I could. The fog seemed to clutch at me, branches reaching out to snag my clothes, but I pushed through it all. By the time I made it back to the ranger station, I was gasping for breath, my lungs burning. Marge was waiting for me, her face pale with worry. Arthur, what happened out there? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I collapsed into a chair, trying to catch my breath. I don't know, Marge. Something attacked that campsite, and I think it hurt someone. We followed the tracks, and I saw something, but it wasn't human. It couldn't have been human. Marge's expression was a mix of concern and disbelief. We need to call this in, Arthur. Now. The next few hours passed in a blur. We reported the incident to the local sheriff's department, who organized a search team to investigate. They found the campsite just as I described it, and even some of the strange tracks I'd followed. But there was no sign of the creature I'd seen, nor any trace of the missing campers. The search went on for days, with teams combing every inch of the park. They found Mark Jensen's car in the parking lot, confirming that he and at least one other person had been in the park. But beyond that, it was as if they had vanished into thin air. I was questioned repeatedly by the sheriff's department and later by state investigators. I told them everything I'd seen, holding nothing back. I could tell from their expressions that they didn't believe me, at least not about the creature. They were more inclined to think that I'd stumbled upon some kind of animal attack and that the stress and fog had played tricks on my mind. After a week of fruitless searching, the official investigation was scaled back. The incident was classified as a missing persons case, with an animal attack listed as a possible cause. Whispering Pines was closed to the public pending a full review of safety protocols. In the weeks that followed, I found myself struggling to come to terms with what had happened. I replayed the events of that day over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of something that defied all logic. Had I really seen what I thought I saw, or had fear and fog combined to create some kind of hallucination? Marge and I were reassigned administrative duties while the park remained closed. One evening, about a month after the incident, we were having a drink at O'Malley's, the local bar where most of the park staff hung out. The conversation, as it often did those days, drifted back to that fateful day. "You really think it was some kind of creature?" Marge asked, nursing her beer. "Not just a bear or something." I shook my head. "I'm all what I saw, Marge. It wasn't any animal I've ever encountered. It was something else. Something that doesn't belong in our world." Marge was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "You know, there are stories about these woods. Old stories passed down by the Native American tribes that used to live here. They talk about a creature they called the Wendigo." I raised an eyebrow. "Wendigo? Isn't that some kind of cannibal spirit?" She nodded. "In some versions, yeah, but in others it's described as a malevolent spirit of the forest. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that can steal a person's soul. Sound familiar? A chill ran down my spine. "You believe in that stuff?" Marge shrugged. "I didn't. But after what happened, I don't know, Arthur, maybe there's some truth to the old legends." The idea of the Wendigo stuck with me, and over the next few weeks I found myself researching Native American folklore whenever I had the chance. The stories varied, but they all described a similar creature. Tall, otherworldly, and terrifying. A hunter that preyed on the unwary, particularly those who ventured too far into its domain. Whispering Pines reopened to the public about 2 months after the incident. New safety measures were put in place, including a buddy system for hikers and more frequent patrols. Marge and I were back on regular duty, but things were never quite the same. Every time I walked through those woods, I felt like I was being watched. The shadows seemed deeper, the silences more oppressive. I never saw the creature again, but the memory of those dark, soul-piercing eyes haunted my dream. As the hours passed, the incident faded from public memory. The case of the missing campers remained unsolved, just another mystery to be speculated about around campfires. But for those of us who were there, who saw the aftermath and felt the lingering presence of something ancient and malevolent, the forest would never be the same. I'm retiring next month, hanging up my ranger hat for good. Marge keeps telling me I should write a book about my experiences, but I'm not sure the world is ready for that story. Some things I've come to believe are better left in the shadows. But as I prepare to leave Whispering Pines for the last time, I can't help but wonder, what really happened that foggy October morning? What was the true nature of the creature I encountered? And most chillingly of all, is it still out there, waiting in the dark heart of the forest for its next unsuspecting victim? I may not have answers to these questions, and perhaps I never will, but I do know one thing for certain. The woods aren't as safe as they seem. There are things out there, things we don't understand, and perhaps were never meant to. And sometimes it's better to leave them be, undisturbed in their ancient slumber. As for me, I'll be content to spend my retirement far from the deep woods, where the only shadows I need to worry about are those cast by the setting sun on my porch, but on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees. I'll think back to that day in Whispering Pines, and I'll wonder about the secrets that still lurk in the heart of the forest. My name is James Walker. This is a true story of events that happened to me in September of 2012 when I was a ranger in Olympic National Park. I've been hesitant to share this account for years, but now, as I approach the twilight of my life, I feel compelled to put these experiences to paper. Perhaps it will serve as a warning, or maybe just a reminder that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. I'd been a ranger in Olympic National Park for a little over 5 years when it happened. The job was a perfect fit for me. I loved the rainforests, the remoteness, the feeling that I'd stepped into another world entirely, but there's remote. And then there's the deep Ho rainforest. Miles of old growth trees dripping with moss, thick underbrush that seems to swallow sound itself. A kind of place where sunlight barely filters through and getting lost is terrifyingly easy. In early September of 2012, I was assigned to trail maintenance in one of the most secluded areas of the park. It was a routine 2-day job meant to be tackled alone, routine, at least by ranger standards. My first day on the job went about as smoothly as cutting back vines and overgrowth can get. By evening, I'd set up camp in a small clearing near the river, cooked myself a freeze-dried dinner, and settled down with my headlamp and a paperback to unwind before bed. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a bear, not a cougar, not the usual symphony of forest critters settling in for might. It was something like a sob, choked and desperate, followed by a scuffling sound in the undergrowth. Now, particle is clear when it comes to civilians in trouble. That's when you intervene, but rangers out in the backcountry, you tread lightly, respect the wilderness for what it is. Still, there was something about that sound that set my teeth on edge. I grabbed my rifle, clicked off the safety, and headed in the direction of the noise. The ferns and fallen leaves muffled my footsteps, making the forest seem even quieter after the strange cry. Every creaking branch had me on edge. Up ahead, something thrashed in a thicket of thorny vines. "Hello? Anyone there?" I called out, my voice hoarse in the quiet. No answer came, just an odd rustling sound followed by a flash of movement deeper in the darkness. I took a cautious step forward, my finger resting lightly on the trigger of my rifle, and that's when the thing pounced. It knocked me clean off my feet, a blur of sinewy limbs and foul-smelling fur. I hit the wet ground with a grunt, my rifle skidding away into the underbrush. I got a glimpse of clawed hands too long for a bear and rows of teeth pointed in yellow. All I really remember are the eyes. Big, amber, and burning with a hate that felt, well, not just animal. It let out a blood-curdling screech and lunged for my throat. I rolled away, fumbling desperately in the damp leaves for my rifle. I found it, twisted as much as I dared with the thing so close, and took a shot, more out of instinct than anything else. The thing recoiled with a howl, a spray of blood marking the tree behind it, but it wasn't down yet. It circled me, panting heavily, its eyes locked on me like prey. That's when I saw it clearly. Too skinny to be a bear, yet strong enough to have taken a grown man down. Skin stretched over prominent ribs, patchy in places, and mottled a sickly brown. The head was almost dog-like, but elongated and filled with far too many teeth. It stalked me like a predator, but there was more there. An intelligence that set my teeth on edge. I fired again. It flinched, then scrambled further into the undergrowth, vanishing in seconds amidst the shadows of the trees. Shaking, I got to my feet, my heart pounding like a war drum. I had to get out of there. Radioing in to report the incident was met with predictable skepticism. It took 3 days. A team of rangers armed to the teeth, and an awful lot of blood splatter on the forest floor before they believed what I saw out there. They never found the creature, said it must have been a sick bear or maybe a coyote with mange playing mind games with me. I transferred shortly after that, took a desk job up in Seattle. I haven't even liked going on hikes lately, the trees closing in too tight. But every now and then at night when the city noise subsides, I swear I hear that screech again. And then I see those eyes glowing in the darkness just beyond my window. It's been over a decade since that night at Olympic National Park. But the memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown sharper and more insistent. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away as the product of fear and isolation. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. I'm not the only one with a story like this. Over the years, I've heard whispers, fragments of similar encounters from other rangers, hikers, and backwoods folk. They don't talk about it openly. Who would believe them? But in quiet corners of bars around dying campfires, the stories come out. Then was Elias Harper, a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountain. His story reached me through the grapevine, passed along by a mutual friend who knew we'd both seen something. Elias' encounter happened in October 2016, 4 years after mine. The details were different, but the core of it, the otherworldly menace, the primal fear, was the same. Elias told it like this. I'm a national park ranger working in the Great Smoky Mountain. I love the views up here, but man, these woods go on forever. And half the time you can see 10 feet through the fog. Perfect recipe for folks getting themselves lost. Got the call about a missing hiker around dusk. Young guy, early 20s, on a solo trip. Last checked in at a ranger station further into the back country and never made it to his planned campsite. Cell service out here is spotty at best, so it wasn't uncommon for people to go off grid for stretches. But a storm was brewing and rangers don't take chances. I suited up, headed out. The trail wound through thick forest, dripping with mist and shadowed by ancient trees. Rain began to fall. A cold, insistent drizzle. Found his discarded pack a few miles in. It was torn open, gear scattered like he dumped it in a panic. I rolled by a shredded energy bar wrapper, frown deepening. Didn't look like a bear attack. Bear scats easy to spot, and they usually leave most of the inedible stuff undisturbed. What I did find were tracks, big ones, too wide for a human, and the toes were split. Out strangely, a chill unrelated to the rain snaked down my spine. We got mountain lions up here, but something about the size and shape of these prints felt wrong. Followed those tracks deeper into the woods. The rain picked up, washing away any clearer trace, but I knew I was on the right path. Panic gnawed at my gut. If it was a big cat, the weather would flush it out into the open, same as the hiker. We were both in danger, only I had a radio and a rifle. The forest floor sloped downwards, leading towards a shadowy ravine. As I got closer, the smell hit me. Blood and wet fur mixing with that same rotten chemical stink that had been haunting my nightmares ever since. Well, that's a whole other mess. But trust me, once you smell that, you don't ever forget it. The ravine snaked through the trees, and I moved silently along the high ground, tracking whatever had made those prints. Then ahead of me, movement, a flicker of something pale and unnaturally large, hunkering beneath a jutting rock. I crouched lower, my heart pounding against my ribs. That's when I saw it, truly saw it, a mountain lion. This thing was humanoid, but only vaguely. Too tall, too lean, its skin hanging loose on a knobby frame. Its head was like a misshapen skull with yellow eyes that burned like embers in the gathering gloom. Claws, long as a man's fingers, dug into the carcass of what used to be the missing hiker. I fought back bile, raised my rifle with trembling hands. It was a decent shot, but this was beyond any training they'd give you at the academy. Had to make this first one count. I lined up the sights, took a deep, steady breath. Then the damn flashlight flickered. Must have gotten knocked loose when I dropped my pack back at the campsite. The beam of light swung wildly, illuminating the creature for a horrifying second. It shrieked, a sound like metal scraping against stone, and reared back, shielding its eyes. It dropped the remains of the hiker and lunged toward me, moving with a speed that defied its skeletal frame. I fired once, twice, the rifle bucking hard against my shoulder. It flinched, roared, but it kept coming. I only had time to scramble back a few steps before it was on me. A force like a runaway truck slammed into my chest, sending me sprawling backward. I hit the earth hard, my rifle flying from my grasp. The creature loomed above me, its fetid breath washing over my face. I fumbled for my backup pistol, my fingers clumsy with fear and cold. It raised a clawed hand to strike. Somehow I managed to roll a blow, narrowly missing my skull but tearing open my shoulder. I scrambled back, scrabbling desperately for a weapon, anything. The creature snarled, stalking forward. Pain seared through me and my vision blurred around the edges. This was it. This was how it ended. A sudden beam of intense light cut through the forest gloom, so bright it made me flinch. The creature jerked back, hissing, the light stinging its eyes. Confused but desperate, I swung my own flashlight around. Another beam joined mine from further down the slope, accompanied by a familiar voice yelling my name. Reinforcements finally. The creature, caught between our flashlights, whirled in a frenzy of snapping claws and gnashing teeth. Its skin began to smoke where the light touched it, a sickening smell filling the air. And then, with a final howl of rage, it turned and vanished into the undergrowth, the sounds of its retreat muffled by the pounding rain and the roaring pulse in my ears. My fellow rangers, Edie and Walker, found me slumped against a tree, bleeding and gasping for breath. Their faces were a mix of relief and horror when they saw the claw marks raking my shoulder. Edie patched me up as best she could while Walker swept the area, found my rifle further down the ravine, but no sign of the creature. It took two of them to haul me back down the trail to the main road. They kept throwing nervous glances over their shoulders, flashlights cut through the darkness. Every rustle of branches, every echoing hoot of an owl made us jumpy. It wasn't until the flashing lights of the ambulance came into view that I began to relax my death grip on my pistol. At the hospital, they stitched me up, ran every test imaginable, and then came the questions. Work services, local cops, they all wanted details. I stumbled through a description of the creature, doing my best to stick to the facts, avoid sounding like a lunatic seeing monsters. They exchanged uneasy looks. I could read it in their eyes. They didn't fully believe me. Word must have leaked because soon enough reporters descended. Questions about the missing hiker, the animal attack. I stuck to my line, injuries attributed to falling during the rescue mission. And have the whole world thinking there's some unholy beast roaming our national parks. They bought the story, at least officially. The aftermath was a blur. Weeks of physical therapy for my torn-up shoulder. Nightmares that jolted me awake, sweating and gasping. I went back to work eventually, but everything had changed. Every hike, every patrol, I scanned the trees, not for lost hikers, but for those glowing yellow eyes and the stench of decay. And there were rumors, whispers among the other rangers, a sighting of a strange, emaciated figure near a campsite. A string of shredded tents blamed on wild animal activity. All that whisper about the lone hiker who went missing deep in the backcountry, leaving behind only a single monstrous footprint in the mud. Nobody ever connected the dots officially, of course. One night I was on a late patrol when I encountered Edie at a crossroads deep in the park. She didn't say a word, just passed me a thermos of strong coffee in a sealed envelope. Even me to ask what was inside. Silver bullets, hand-loaded. Not standard issue for park rangers, that's for sure. She met my gaze, the unspoken understanding clear in her eyes. After what you saw, she said, her voice low. Figured you could use these. Be careful out here, Elias. The knowledge that I wasn't alone in this that helped. One night at least. But there was also a growing certainty. This wasn't over. That creature was still out there. Call it a wendigo, a demon, whatever those old stories named it. The fact remains there's something preying on the lost and alone in these mountains. One day, maybe I track it down, put an end to its reign of terror, but that felt like a fool's hope. See, the thing about fighting monsters is they fight back, and sometimes they win. One foggy morning, a shredded backpack turns up or a hiker vanishes on a familiar trail, and I'm left wondering if it got another one. Meanwhile, my own life's on hold. I've got a half-healed scar, a beat-up old truck, and a growing collection of high-powered flashlights. No wife, no kids. Can't drag anyone into this mess. Sometimes I think about leaving the mountains, trying to get lost in a big city crowd for a while, see if I could just disappear. But then I remember the faces of the missing, the way that young hikers' torn-up gear was strewn across the trail, the look in Eddie's eyes when she handed me those bullets, and something stubborn and stupid inside me digs in. So I keep my gear ready, rifle cleaned, and an extra flashlight within reach at all times. Every time I drive along the park roads, every time I head into the woods, the weight of responsibility settles heavy on my shoulders. It feels less like a job now and more like a war. A war that most folks don't even know is happening, and out there under the old trees and shrouded in the mountain fog, it waits. The creature with the glowing eyes and unending hunger waits for the next lost hiker, the next overconfident camper, the next ranger who stumbles upon its shadowed domain. Some nights, lying awake in my cabin with the rain rattling the roof and the wind sounding like a mournful howl, I wonder who it will be waiting for when I inevitably fail. My flashlight flickers or my aim misjudges, or it finally catches me unaware. If anyone will take up the fight when I'm gone. Maybe someday this story will get told after it's too late for me. Maybe some younger ranger, green and brave and foolish like I used to be, will find this. And hell, if that's you, whoever you are, well, good luck, kid, you'll need it. Because trust me, the monsters are real, the battle will never end. And if the shadows in the woods seem a little deeper, those glowing eyes in the distance, a little brighter, the rustle of leaves a little closer, well, best keep your wits sharp and your flashlight ready. You might just be the next line of defense against the things unseen. As I, James Walker, sit here in my Seattle apartment, looking out at the city lights and never quite banish the darkness, I can't help but feel a connection to Elias and all the others who face the unknown in the wilderness. Our stories may differ in the details, but the core truth remains the same. There are things out there, things beyond our understanding, and they're hungry. I've often wondered if I should have stayed, should have fought like Elias did, but got the better of me. I ran from the forests and the responsibility, yet even here, surrounded by concrete and steel, I can escape the memory of those eyes, that unholy screech. I've often wondered if I should have stayed, should have fought like Elias did, but fear got the better of me. I'd often wondered if I should have stayed or fought like Elias did, but fear got the better of me. I ran from the forests and the responsibility, yet even here surrounded by concrete and steel, I can't escape the memory of those eyes, that unholy screech. The odds is on particularly dark nights I find myself reaching for a flashlight, peering out into the city shadows, because deep down I know the truth. Lawless and others like him face it every day. The monsters are real, and they're not confined to the wilderness. They're out there, waiting, watching, and whether we choose to face them or not, their hunger never ceases. So, to anyone who reads this, remember, stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and always, against the darkness, there's hope. My name is Ronald Hall. I've been a ranger with the National Park Service for almost 15 years now, but my story and my long affair with Yellowstone started long before I put on the uniform. I grew up in a small town in Montana just north of Yellowstone. As a kid, the park was my playground, my classroom, and my first love. I can still remember the first time my dad took me to see Old Faithful, I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, all gangly limbs and wide-eyed wonder. We stood there in the crowd waiting, and I remember thinking it was all a big joke. How could water just shoot out of the ground like that? And then it happened. The geysers erupted, a towering column of steam and water that seemed to touch the sky. I was awestruck. In that moment, I knew that Yellowstone was something special, something magical. As I grew older, my fascination with the park only deepened. Every chance I got, I was there, hiking the trails, watching the wildlife, learning the rhythms of the land. By the time I was in high school, I knew every inch of the park that was open to the public and quite a few that weren't. I went away to college, studied environmental science, always with the goal of coming back to Yellowstone. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. I ended up in the corporate world, working for a big energy company. Good money, but it never sat right with me. Every time I had to write a report justifying some new drilling project, I felt like I was betraying that wide-eyed kid who'd fallen in love with Old Faithful. It took me 30 years to find my way back. 30 years of boardrooms and balance sheets of feeling more and more disconnected from the natural world I loved. When I finally quit, my wife thought I was having a midlife crisis. Maybe I was. All I knew was that I needed to get back to Yellowstone. I applied to the National Park Service the day after I quit my job. I was 57 years old, competing against kids fresh out of college. But I had something they didn't, a lifetime of love for the park and the determination to protect it. To my surprise, they hired me. I like to think it was my qualifications, but sometimes I wonder if they just needed someone who could afford to work for government wages. Those first few years as a ranger were like coming home. Every day I'd put on that uniform, pin on that badge, and feel a sense of pride I'd never known in all my years in the corporate world. I was where I belonged, doing what I was meant to do. But Yellowstone, for all its beauty, isn't always a gentle place. It's a land of extremes, boiling hot springs and freezing winters, peaceful meadows and violent volcanic activity. And as I was about to learn, it held secrets far darker and more terrifying than I could have imagined. It was the fall of 2016 when things started to change. I've been a ranger for about 12 years by then, mostly doing backcountry work. Trail maintenance, wildlife surveys, the occasional search and rescue when some unprepared tourist decided to go off trail and got themselves lost. October in Yellowstone is a special time. The summer crowds have gone, leaving the park to those of us who call it home year-round. The air gets crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. The aspens turn a brilliant gold, standing out against the deep green of the pines like nature's own work of art. I was out on the Pelican Valley Trail doing some routine maintenance. It had been a busy summer and the trail was showing the wear and tear of thousands of boots. I was hauling fallen timber, clearing the path, enjoying the quiet. It's one of the things I love most about the backcountry, the silence. Not complete silence, mind you, there's always something if you listen close enough. The whisper of wind through the trees, the distant call of an elk, the scurrying of small creatures in the underbrush. It's a different kind of quiet than you get in the city. It's a living quiet, if that makes any sense. I'd been working for a few hours when I smelled it. At first I thought it was just the usual forest smell, decaying leaves, damp earth. But there was something else underneath, something wrong. It was a sickly sweet smell, like meat left out in the sun too long. I followed the smell, my heart starting to race. In the back of my mind I was thinking, it was probably just a dead animal, maybe a deer or an elk that had been taken down by a predator. But as I got closer, that rational part of my brain started to quiet down, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I found him in a small clearing near a stand of aspens. What was left of him, anyway? The body was, well, it's hard to describe without turning your stomach. The claws were in shreds, barely recognizable as clothing at all. What the scavengers had gotten to was twisted and mangled in a way that made my blood run cold. No, I've seen my share of animal attacks over the years, bears, mountain lions, the occasional wolf. This wasn't like any of those. The bones were gnawed on, sure, but the marks were all wrong. Too precise in some places, too savage in others. And the way the body was positioned, it was like whatever had done this had been playing with its food. I radioed it in, trying to keep my voice steady. I expected they'd send out a wildlife biologist, maybe one of the bear management team. What I didn't expect was the response I got. Ranger Hole, secure the area, do not approach the remains. Wait for the response team, over. The loose on the other end was tense, clipped. Not the usual easygoing tone of our dispatch. I tried to get more information, but all I got was a repeated order to stay put. Wait for the team. They arrived about an hour later. 3 men in unmarked black SUVs. They weren't Park Service, that much was clear. They moved with a kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of military or law enforcement background. One of them, a tall, lean man with close-cropped gray hair, approached me while the other secured the scene. Ranger Hall, he asked, his voice gruff. I nodded. And Major Hawkins, let's take it from here. I need you to forget what you saw here today. Understood. I started to protest. This was my park, after all. I had a right to know what was going on, but something in Hawkins' eyes stopped me. There was a hardness there, yes, but also something else. Fear, surely not. What could make a man like that afraid? Understood, I said, the wet tasting bitter in my mouth. As I turned to leave, Hawkins called out to me. Ranger Hall, keep your eyes open out there, and if you see anything unusual, you call it in immediately. Do not engage. Do you understand? I nodded again, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the ordinary. As I made my way back to my patrol vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The forest, which had always been a place of wonder and beauty to me, suddenly felt oppressive, threatening. Every shadow seemed to hide some nameless threat. Every rustle in the undergrowth of potential danger. I didn't sleep well that night, or for many nights after. In my dreams, I saw those mangled remains, heard the crunch of bones, smelled that sickly, sweet odor, and always there was a presence in the darkness, watching, waiting. Little did I know this was just the beginning. The true horrors that Yellowstone held were yet to reveal themselves. In the days following the discovery, an uneasy quiet settled over the ranger station. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The official story was that the body it found was the result of a bear attack, but the less who worked the backcountry were buying it. Jenna, my usual patrol partner, cornered me in the break room about a week after the incident. She was a tough cookie, Jenna, ex-military, been with the Park Service for over a decade. Not the type to scare easy. Ron, she said, her voice low. What really happened out there? I glanced around, making sure we were alone. I told you, Jen, bear attack. She snorted, clearly not buying it. Cut the crap, Ron. I've seen bear attacks. That report you filed, that wasn't no bear. I sighed, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I don't know what it was, Jen, but you're right. It wasn't a bear. I told her everything. There's strange marks on the bones, the way the body had been arranged. The men in black SUVs. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from her face. Jesus, Ron, she whispered when I'd finished. What the hell is going on in this park? I shook my head. I don't know, but I've got a feeling we're going to find out whether we want to or not. Over the next few weeks, the whispers grew. Other rangers reported strange sightings, unusual tracks that didn't match any known animal. Eerie howls in the night that sent chills down the spines of even the most experienced young backcountry guides. And always that lingering sense of being watched. The tourists, of course, noticed nothing. They continued to flood into the park, owing and eyeing over old, faithful, snapping pictures of bison and elk, blissfully unaware of the darkness that seemed to be gathering at edges of their vision. Who knew? We rangers, we could feel it. Something had changed in Yellowstone. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. It was about 3 weeks after I'd found the body that I had my first real encounter with whatever it was that was stalking our park. I was out on a routine patrol, checking some of the more remote campsites. It was late afternoon, that golden hour when the sun hangs low in the sky, painting everything in warm, rich colors. I just finished inspecting a campsite and was heading back to my vehicle when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a low moaning sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But as I listened, it changed, became more focused, more intentional. It was coming from a thick stand of pines off to my left. I stood there frozen, my hand on my sidearm. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there. But I was a ranger. This was my park, my responsibility. Slowly, carefully, I moved towards the sound. The moaning had stopped, replaced by heavy, wet breathing. As I got closer, I caught a whiff of that same sickly sweet smell I'd encountered at the scene of the body. I was about 10 feet from the tree line when I saw it. For a second, a fleeting glimpse through the branches, a shape, massive and dark, moving with fluidity that seemed impossible for its size. And eyes, God, those eyes, yellow and glowing, filled with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment, those eyes locked with mine, and I felt a terror so profound that it rooted me to the spot. This wasn't just an animal, this was something else. Something that didn't belong in this world. And then it was gone. The shape melted back into the shadows, leaving nothing but the rustling of branches and that lingering awful smell. I don't remember much about the trip back to my vehicle. I drove back to the ranger station in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there, I sat in the parking lot for a long time trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to report it, to tell someone, anyone, about what was out there in our woods. But another part, the part that was growing stronger by the day, knew that doing so would be useless. Whatever this thing was, it was beyond our usual protocols, beyond our understanding. As I finally got out of my vehicle and headed into the station, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I outbuilt her somehow, worn, and in my eyes I saw something I'd never seen before, fear. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The true test of our courage, and of the very fabric of reality as we knew it, was yet to come. As autumn deepened into winter, the atmosphere in Yellowstone grew increasingly tense. The tourist season was winding down, leaving the park to those of us who called it home year-round. But unlike previous years, when the quiet months were a welcome respite, this winter brought with it a sense of foreboding. More sightings were reported, strange tracks in the snow that didn't match any known animal, eerie howls that echoed through the valleys, setting the wolves to answering with their own mournful cries. And always that sense of being watched. The higher-ups tried to keep a lid on things. Official reports spoke of unusually active wildlife, of natural phenomena that were under investigation. But those of us on the ground knew better. We'd seen too much, heard too much, to buy the official line. Regina and I were paired up more often than not these days. There was an unspoken agreement among the rangers. Nobody went into the backcountry alone anymore. Safety in numbers, though, deep down. I think we all knew that if we encountered whatever was out there, numbers wouldn't make a damn bit of difference. It was on one of these patrols in late November that we had our first real confrontation with the creature. We were checking some of the remote campsites, making sure they were properly closed down for the winter. The day had started clear and cold, but as afternoon wore on, the heavy mist rolled in, blanketing the forest in an eerie white shroud. We just finished securing the last campsite on our list and were heading back to our vehicle, when Jenna suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. "Run," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears at first, hearing nothing but the soft patter of mist on leaves, but then I caught it. A low rumbling sound, almost like a growl but deeper and more wrong somehow. It seemed to be coming from all around us, as if the very forest itself was growling. We stood back to back, our rifles ready, scanning the mist-shrouded trees. The growling grew louder and closer. I could feel Jenna trembling against my back, or maybe it was me who was shaking. The light seemed to thicken, swirling around us in patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. And then we saw it. It emerged from the mist like a nightmare-given form, massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to shift and change as we watched. One moment it was covered in thick matted fur. The next it seemed almost skeletal, with skin stretched tight over impossible angles and planes. But it was the face that haunted me, that face that wasn't a face at all, but a twisted parody of one. Eyes that glowed with an unholy yellow light, a mouth that was too wide, filled with teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we stood there, frozen. The creature regarded us with those burning eyes, and I felt the weight of an intelligence that was utterly alien, utterly hostile to everything we were. The ominous sound of the rifle was deafening in the mist-muffled forest. The creature staggered back, black eyes spurting from a wound in its chest, but instead of falling it roared, a sound that shook the trees and sent birds scattering in panic. We both opened fire then, our training taking over. Blood after bullet slammed into the creature, each one drawing more of that black oily blood. But it kept coming, its form seeming to flow around the wounds, healing even as we inflicted them. It was almost upon us when I heard the thunder of more gunfire. A group of figures burst from the mist, other rangers drawn by the sound of our shots. The creature, faced with this new threat, let out one final earth-shaking roar before melting back into the mist. We stood there, panting, our ears ringing from the gunfire. The other rangers approached cautiously, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. What the hell was that thing? One of the other rangers, a young guy named Mike, asked. Nobody answered. What could we say? How could we explain what we just seen? What we just fought? In the days that followed, the park went into lockdown. The few remaining tourists were quietly but firmly escorted out, citing environmental hazards. 3 rangers were sworn to secrecy, told to report any and all sightings directly to a special task force that had been brought in. The task force, led by the same Agent Hawkins I'd met before, set up a command center in one of the old lodges. They brought in equipment I'd never seen before, machines that beeped and whirred, measuring things I couldn't even begin to understand. Jenna and I were debriefed separately, our accounts recorded and analyzed. I could tell they were looking for inconsistencies, for signs that we might be exaggerating or imagining things. But our stories matched up perfectly. How could they not? The memory of that creature was burned into our minds, impossible to forget or misremember. As winter settled in earnest over Yellowstone, the hunt for the creature began in earnest. We rangers were paired with members of Hawkins' team. Our local knowledge combined with their high-tech equipment and military training. The park, while as a place of wonder and beauty to me, took on a sinister aspect. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every unexplained sound a potential encounter. The familiar trails and landmarks became a treacherous battleground in a war against an enemy we barely understood. It was on one of these patrols deep in the Lamar Valley that we had our next major encounter. It was paired with one of Hawkins' men, a taciturn ex-Navy SEAL named Rodriguez. who'd been tracking unusual heat signatures picked up by their satellite imaging following a trail that led us deeper and deeper into the backcountry. The day was really cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever be warm again. Our bath frosted in the air and the snow crunched under our boots as we made our way through a dense stand of pines. Rodriguez suddenly held up his hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed to a clearing ahead where the snow was disturbed in a way that made my heart race. The tracks were massive, easily twice the size of a grizzly's, and they seemed to shift and change even as we watched. We approached cautiously, our weapons at the ready. The clearing was silent, too silent. Even the ever-present wind seemed to have died down, leaving us in a bubble of unnatural quiet. That's when we saw it. At first I thought it was just another snow-covered log, but then it moved. The creature uncoiled itself, rising to its full height. In the stark daylight, it was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its form seemed to constantly shift and change as if it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to be. One moment it was covered in thick matted fur, the next it was almost skeletal, with skin stretched tight over impossible angles. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. He opened fire, the sound of his high-powered rifle shattering the unnatural silence. The creature roared, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and charged. What followed was a blur of violence and terror. We emptied our weapons into the thing, but it kept coming. I saw Rodriguez go down, swatted aside like a ragdoll by one massive clawed hand. Then it was on me. The stench of it was overwhelming, a mix of rotting meat and something older, more alien. Its face, if you could call it that, was inches from mine. His glowing yellow eyes bored into me, and I felt the weight of an intelligence that was utterly inhuman, utterly malevolent. I thought I was dead. I knew I was dead, but then, just as the creature's jaws were about to close on my throat, something extraordinary happened. The air itself seemed to tear open. There was a sound like reality breaking, and a blinding light that seared my eyes even through closed lids. When I could see again, the creature was gone. In its place was nothing, a void in the shape of the creature, as if it had been cut out, as of the world. Rodriguez and I were airlifted out, both of us in shock. The official report said we'd had a close encounter with a bear, but we knew better. Something had happened out there in the Lamar Valley, something that defied explanation. In the weeks that followed, more strange events occurred. Portals, like the one we'd seen, began opening up all over the park. Sometimes it spit out more creatures, other times it sucked things in. Trees, rocks, even water from the rivers and lakes. Token's team worked around the clock trying to understand what was happening. They brought in scientists, theologians, even a few people who looked more like New Age mystics than government agents. The truth, when it finally came out, was stranger than anything we could have imagined. Yellowstone, it turned out, wasn't just a national park. It wasn't even just a supervolcano. It was a nexus, a weak point in the fabric of reality. The geothermal activity that made the park famous was just a side effect of the real energy that pulsed beneath the surface, the energy of other dimensions pressing against our own. The creatures as we now knew, weren't from our world at all. They were from somewhere else, someplace so alien, so utterly foreign to our reality that merely existing in our dimension caused them pain and drove them to lash out. But why now? Why, after millennia of relative peace? Was the veil between worlds suddenly thinning? The answer, ironically, lay in our efforts to protect the park. The changing climate, the careful management of wildlife populations, even our efforts to prevent wildfires, all of it had upset a delicate balance. We'd been so focused on preserving the Yellowstone, we could see that we'd inadvertently weakened the barriers holding back the Yellowstone we couldn't see. The knowledge of what we were really dealing with didn't make our job any easier. If anything, it made it harder. How do you fight something that, by its very nature, doesn't fully exist in your reality? But fight we did. Rangers and special forces, scientists and shamans all working together in a desperate bid to close the rifts and drive the creatures back to their own dimension. It all came to a head on a cold, clear night in February. The largest rift yet had opened near Old Faithful, a gaping wound in reality that pulsed with otherworldly light. Creatures poured through more than we'd ever seen before. I was there, along with Jenna Hawkins, and what felt like every able-bodied person left in the park. We had weapons blessed by priests, coated in mixtures concocted by scientists, imbued with energies by New Age mystics. Whether by faith, science, or sheer desperate belief, they worked. The battle was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Reality itself seemed to warp and bend around us. I saw things that night that my mind still shies away from. Horrors that defied description. We held the line, inch by bloody inch. We drove them back. And then, just when it seemed we might be overwhelmed, Old Faithful erupted. But it wasn't water that shot into the sky. It was light, pure and blinding. The geyser had always been a gateway, not just to the geothermal wonders beneath the park, but to the very energy of our world. The light engulfed everything. I heard the creatures shriek, their cries fading as they were driven back through the rift. And then, with a sound like 1,000 thunderclaps, the rift slammed shut. In the aftermath, as we tended to our wounded and tried to make sense of what had happened, I looked out over the park. Some rose from the ground, the trees stood silent under their blanket of snow, and in the distance a herd of bison grazed peacefully, as if nothing had happened. Yellowstone had protected itself, I realized. It had used us, all of us, as instruments to restore the balance. We hadn't saved the park. The park had saved itself. Years have passed since that night. Yellowstone remains open to the public, its wonders still drawing millions of visitors each year. To most, it's just a beautiful national park, a place of geysers and wildlife and stunning vistas. But for those of us who know the truth, it's so much more. It's a boundary between worlds, a place where reality is thin and magic, for lack of a better word, is real. I'm retired now, but I still live near the park. Sometimes on quiet nights, I drive up to one of the overlooks and just sit watching the land I've come to know so well. And sometimes, if the light is just right, I think I can see something, a shimmer in the air, a hint of other worlds pressing close. Yellowstone keeps its secrets well, but for those who know where to look, who know how to listen, the truth is there. In the roar of the geysers, in the cry of the wolves, in the very land itself, this park, this wonderland, this nexus of realities, it's more than just a place. It's alive, it's aware, and it's watching. So if you visit Yellowstone, enjoy its beauty, marvel at its wonders. But remember, you're not just in a national park, you're standing on the border between worlds. And sometimes the border looks back. The man on is Donald Taylor. The events I'm about to recount happened just a few weeks ago, but they've left an indelible mark on my life. I've been a park ranger for the past 15 years in a small, largely forgotten national park tucked away in the northwest corner of the United States. It's a place of rugged beauty where towering evergreens stand sentinel over rushing streams and hidden valleys. Before I found my calling in the Park Service, I spent a few years in the Marine. Those years shaped me in ways I'm still discovering, instilling a sense of discipline and respect for nature that serves me well in my current role. When I got out of the service, I knew I wanted a job that would keep me outdoors, somewhere quiet and peaceful. Most days, that's exactly what I get, but not every day. Our park isn't one of the big names that draw millions of visitors each year. We're smaller, more intimate. The kind of place where you can still find true solitude if you're willing to venture off the beaten path. It's a haven for hikers, birdwatchers, and those seeking to reconnect with nature. We don't get the crowds, and that suits me just fine. My partner in this endeavor is Earl, an old-timer who's been with the Park Service for decades. Earl's the kind of guy who seems to have a story for every tree in the forest. He's got a gruff exterior, but a heart of gold and a laugh that sounds like an old engine trying to turn over. We make a good team, Earl and I. He knows the history of the park like the back of his hand, and I bring the energy to keep up with the more adventurous visitors. It was late in the fall when it happened. The tourists had dwindled down to a trickle, as they always do when the weather turns crisp and the leaves start to fall. Most days it was just me, Earl, and the occasional hardy hiker braving the cooling temperatures. I remember that morning clearly. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. A light mist hung in the valleys, giving the whole forest an ethereal quality. I was out on my usual patrol, checking the more remote areas of the park. There's this trail, Green River Trail, that doesn't see much use even in the peak season. It winds through some of the densest forest in the park, climbing steadily into the hills before eventually reaching a small, crystal-clear lake. It's a beautiful hike, but it's not for the faint of heart. The trail is rough in places, with steep inclines and a few tricky creek crossings. It's the kind of trail that only the more experienced and adventurous hikers tackle. I hiked it many times over the years in all kinds of weather, but that day felt different somehow. There was a stillness in the air, a tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I'd been on the trail for about an hour when my radio crackled to life. It was Earl. His voice was uncharacteristically serious. "Braden, you out by Green River?" he asked. "Yeah, what's up?" I replied, already sensing that something was amiss. Got a report of a missing person, a hiker by the name of Dylan Knox. His girlfriend says he didn't come back last night. "Think you could check it out?" I sighed, a mix of concern and resignation. Missing persons aren't common in our park, but they do happen. Usually it's a case of someone getting lost or misjudging how long their hike would take. But overnight, that was more serious. "Yeah, I'm on it," I responded, already quickening my pace. As I continued up the trail, my senses were on high alert. I scanned the surrounding forest, looking for any sign of disturbance, any clue that might lead me to Dylan Knox. The forest seemed to close in around me, and the trees loomed larger, their shadows deeper. It was about an hour into my search when I saw the first sign that something was off. There was a jacket hanging from a branch just off the trail. It was a red windbreaker, definitely out of place in the muted browns and greens of the forest. I approached it carefully, my heart rate picking up. "Earl," I called into my radio. "I found a jacket, red windbreaker. Doesn't look like it's been here long." "Roger that," Earl's voice crackled back. "Any sign of our missing hiker?" "Not yet," I replied, "but I'm going to keep looking." I carefully removed the jacket from the branch, checking for any identification or clues. There was nothing, but the jacket was damp with dew, suggesting it had been there overnight. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my pack before continuing up the trail. The farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. The forest, usually a place of comfort for me, seemed menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig set my nerves on edge. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing instead on the task at hand. It was another half hour before I found the next clue. This time it was a backpack, tossed haphazardly beside the trail. It looked like it had been discarded in a hurry. My hands were shaking slightly as I approached it, a sense of dread building in my gut. I knelt beside the pack, unzipping it carefully. Inside I found some snacks, a water bottle, and a map of the park. There was also a wallet. With a growing sense of unease, I opened it to find Dylan Knox's driver's license staring back at me. "Earl," I called into the radio again, my voice tense. "I found his pack, but he confirms it belongs to Dylan Knox. Still no sign of him." "All right, Braden. Go replied, his voice grim. I'm going to call in some backup. We might need to organize a full search. In the meantime, keep looking to see if I can get any more information from his girlfriend. I acknowledged and pressed on, moving faster now. The trail was getting steeper, the trees denser. As I rounded a bend, I caught a glimpse of something through the trees that made my blood run cold. It looked like a person lying motionless on the ground about 50 yards off the trail. Dylan and I shouted, breaking into a run. My heart was pounding in my ears as I crashed through the underbrush. As I got closer, I realized with a mix of relief and renewed concern that it wasn't Dylan. It was a woman, her clothes torn and dirty, lying face down on the forest floor. I approached cautiously, calling out to her. There was no response. When I reached her, I could see she was breathing but unconscious. I gently rolled her over, checking for injuries. There was a nasty gash on her leg, but otherwise she seemed unharmed. Well, I called into my radio, my voice shaking slightly. I found a woman. She's hurt but alive. Looks like she's been out here a while. No sign of Dylan. Christ, Earl muttered. All right, Brayton. We'll get some medics out there. Can you get her to a clearing where they can reach you? Yeah, I think so, I replied, already assessing the best route back to the trail. I carefully lifted the woman, noting with concern how light she felt, as if she hadn't eaten in days. As I carried her back towards the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The forest was too quiet, unnaturally so. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump. We reached a small clearing where I knew the medics could land a helicopter if necessary. I laid the woman down as gently as I could, trying to make her comfortable. As I did, her eyes fluttered open for a moment. They were wide with fear, darting around wildly before focusing on my face. Don't let her get me, she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. Before I could ask what she meant, her eyes rolled back and she lost consciousness again. A chill ran down my spine at her words. What had she seen out here? What had happened to her? Until Dylan knocked. The wait for the medics felt interminable. I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting to see something emerge from the shadows. When the helicopter finally arrived, the downdraft from its rotors seemed to blow away some of the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the clearing. I gave the medics all the information I had, which wasn't much. As they prepared to transport the woman to the hospital, I steeled myself to head back up the trail. Dylan Knox was still out there somewhere, and I was determined to find him. The sun was starting to set as I resumed my search, casting long shadows through the trees. I kept my flashlight in hand, ready to switch it on as soon as the light faded completely. The forest took on a different character in the twilight, familiar shapes transforming into looming, ominous silhouettes. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another shadow, a trick of the fading light, but as I focused on it, I realized I was looking at a figure standing just off the trail, partially hidden behind a tree. Rama leapt into my throat. Dylan, I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. The figure didn't move or respond. I took a few cautious steps closer, and that's when I realized this wasn't Dylan. It wasn't a normal person at all. The figure was tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, and its eyes were like black pits, reflecting no light. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The creature, for I knew now that's what it was, just stood there, unmoving, its gaze fixed on me. Time seemed to stand still as we regarded each other, neither making a move. With a trembling hand, I raised my flashlight and switched it on, the beam cutting through the gathering darkness. The creature hissed, a sound that sent ice through my veins, and retreated into the shadows with inhuman speed. I didn't wait to see if it would return. I turned and ran down the trail as fast as my legs would carry me, branches whipping at my face as I fled. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station where Earl was waiting, his face etched with concern. "Brayden, what happened?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Earl said as I burst through the door, gasping for breath. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words tumbled out in a confused jumble. How could I describe something that defied explanation? Earl listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "All right," he said finally, his voice calm but tense. "Well, I'll head back up there at first light, see if we can find Dylan and figure out what's going on. For now, try to get some rest." However, rest was the last thing on my mind. That night was the longest of my life. Every creak of the old ranger station, every whisper of wind outside set my nerves on edge. I could shake the image of that creature, its black eyes seeming to bore into my soul. And underneath it all was a gnawing worry. What had happened to Dylan Knox? Was he still out there, lost and alone, or had he encountered that? As the first light of dawn broke over the trees, Earl and I set out, armed and prepared for whatever we might find. The forest seemed different in the morning light, less threatening, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. We found Dylan's jacket and backpack where I'd left them the day before. As we pressed on, following the trail I'd taken, we came across something new, tracks in the soft earth just off the path. They were large and human-like, but with elongated toes that dug deep into the soil. Earl crouched down to examine them, his face grim. "These aren't bear tracks," he muttered, "but they're not human either." We followed the tracks, our progress slow and cautious. They led us further off the trail into a part of the forest I'd rarely explored. The underbrush was thick here, the trees pressing in close, their branches intertwining overhead to block out much of the sunlight. After what felt like hours of tracking, we came upon a cave, its entrance partially hidden by a tangle of vines and brush. The tracks led directly into the yawning darkness of the cave mouth. Earl and I exchanged a look. We both knew what we had to do, but the thought of entering that cave sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't help but think of the creature I'd seen, its pale form and black eyes. Was this its lair? "You sure about this?" Earl asked, his voice low. "Not really," I admitted, "but we have to find Dylan." With a nod, we switched on our flashlights and entered the cave. The air inside was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the warm forest outside. Our nights revealed walls slick with moisture, the beam catching on strange, twisting formation that seemed to writhe in the shifting illumination. As we ventured deeper, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. We found more signs of a struggle, broken branches, scraps of cloth, and dark stains on the rock that I feared might be blood. My stomach churned as we pressed on, deeper into the earth. Suddenly we heard a noise ahead of us, a shuffling sound, followed by a low, guttural breathing that echoed off the cave walls. We raised our flashlights, the beams converging on a hunched form crouched over something on the ground. It was the creature I'd seen in the forest, its pale skin gleaming wetly in the light. And beneath it, lying motionless on the cave floor, was Dylan Knox. The creature's head snapped up at our approach, its black eyes reflecting our flashlight beam. For a moment, we all froze, locked in a tableau of horror. Then, with a hiss that raised the hair on the back of my neck, the creature lunged at us. Earl fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space of the cave. The creature screeched, another unearthly sound that seemed to pierce right through me. It retreated into the darkness, but I could still hear it moving, circling us. We rushed to Dylan's side. He was alive, but barely, his body covered in cuts and bruises. We lifted him between us and started making our way out of the cave as quickly as we could. The journey back seemed to take an eternity. We could hear the creature following us, its breathing and the occasional scrape of claws on stone, letting us know it was never far behind. Just as we reached the cave entrance, it made one final lunge at us. Earl fired again, a muzzle flash briefly eliminating the creature's twisted form. It screamed and fell back, giving us the chance we needed to escape into the sunlight. We didn't stop running until we reached the ranger station, where we called for immediate medical assistance for Dylan. As we waited for the helicopter to arrive, Earl and I tried to process what we'd seen. It all seemed too incredible, too horrifying to be real. In the days that followed, we gave our statements to the police, but we both knew they'd never believe the full story. They searched the cave, but found no sign of the creature. Dylan was rushed to the hospital where he slowly recovered, but he was never the same. He refused to talk about what had happened to him in the cave and moved away as soon as he was well enough to travel. Earl and I continued our work in the park, but we never went back to that part of the forest. Memory of that night stayed with us, a reminder that there are things in this world that we don't understand, things that defy explanation. We started calling it the Pale Stalker, but we rarely spoke of it even to each other. Life on Island, but I couldn't forget. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear it outside my window, a rustle of leaves, a faint who's carried on the wind. I don't know if it's real or just my imagination, but it keeps me awake, wondering if it will ever return. The park is quieter now, fewer people come, and those who do don't venture far from main trails. We don't advertise the Green River Trail anymore. It's still there though, winding through the trees, up into the hills where the Pale Stalker wait. I'm telling this story now, because I think people should know. There are things out there in the dark places of the world that we can't explain. Things that challenge everything we think we know about reality. I've seen one of them, face to face, and that experience has changed me forever. So if you ever find yourself in our little corner of the wilderness, stick to the marked trails. Don't venture out alone. And if you hear something moving in the forest at night, something that doesn't sound quite natural, don't investigate. Turn around, head back to safety, and count yourself lucky. Because out there in the shadows of the ancient trees, something is watching, something is waiting. And not everyone who encounters it lives to tell the tale. In the months following our encounter with the Pale Stalker, life in the park took on a surreal quality. The rhythms of my daily routine remained the same. Patrolling trails, assisting visitors, maintaining facilities. But everything felt different. The forest, once a source of comfort and wonder, now held an undercurrent of menace. Every shadow seemed to hide potential dangers. Every unexpected sound set my nerves on edge. Earl and I rarely spoke about what we'd seen in that cave. It was as if by not discussing it, we could somehow make it less real. But I could see the change in him too. His eyes would dart to the tree line more often. His head never far from his radio. The easy laughter that once punctuated his stories became rarer, replaced by a watchful silence. As winter settled over the park, blanketing the landscape in snow, I found myself hoping that the cold might drive the creature into hibernation or whatever passed for sleep for such a being. But deep down I knew better, however the Pale Stalker was. It wasn't bound by the laws of nature as we understood them. It was about 3 months after our encounter when the first rumors started to circulate. Hikers reported strange noises in the night. Eerie calls that didn't match any known wildlife. A couple camping near Green River Trail swore they saw a pale figure watching them from the trees, vanishing when they tried to get a closer look. Each report sent a chill down my spine, confirming my worst fears. The Pale Stalker wasn't content to stay in its cave. It was venturing out, exploring its territory, and we were the interlopers. I remember one particularly cold January morning when I was out on my usual patrol. The forest was silent, muffled by a thick blanket of snow. My breath frosted in the air as I made my way along the trail, alert for any signs of disturbance. That's when I saw the tracks. They crossed the trail leading off into the dense underbrush. They were similar to the ones Earl and I had followed to the cave, but larger, as if the creature had grown. Without thinking, I found myself following them. Drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain, I pursued the tracks. They led me to a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a lone tree, its bark pale and smooth, unlike any species native to our forest. As I approached, I noticed strange markings carved into the trunk. Symbols I didn't recognize, twisting patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around, my hand flying to my radio. There was nothing there. Just the silent snow-covered forest. For as I turned back to the tree, I froze. There, hanging from one of the lower branches, was a scrap of red fabric. With trembling hands, I retrieved it, recognizing it immediately as a piece of Dylan Knox's jacket. I radioed Earl immediately, my voice shaking as I reported what I'd found. He arrived within the hour, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. We searched the area thoroughly, but found no other signs of the Pale Stalker or its activities. As we made our way back to the ranger station, Errol finally broke the silence we'd maintained about that night in the cave. "We couldn't ignore this anymore, Brayden," he said, his voice low and serious. "Whatever that thing is, it's not going away. I have a feeling it's not done with us yet." He was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into researching the history of the park and the surrounding area, looking for any clues that might help us understand what we were dealing with. We brought over old maps, local legends, and historical accounts, searching for any mention of pale creatures or mysterious disappearances. What we found was disturbing. The area had a long history of unexplained events dating back to the earliest settlers. Native American legends spoke of a pale walker that stalked the forests, taking those who wandered too far from their tribes. Early pioneers reported encounters with a creature they described as neither man nor beast, but something in between. Most intriguing was a journal we found in the park's archives, written by a trapper named Jeremiah Hawkins in 1876. Hawkins described finding a cave system deep in the woods, its walls covered in strange symbols. He wrote of hearing odd noises and feeling watched constantly. His final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, read, "It's here, God help me, it's here, and it's hungry." Hawkins was never seen again. As spring arrived, bringing with it a new influx of visitors to the park, Earl and I found ourselves in a difficult position. We knew there was a very real danger lurking in our forests, but we couldn't exactly warn people about a creature that by all official accounts didn't exist. Instead, we stepped up our patrols, especially in areas near Green River Trail, and became extra vigilant about enforcing park rules and safety guidelines. It was during one of these patrols in late April that I had my second direct encounter with the Pale Stalker. I was checking their remote campsite when I heard a scream echo through the trees. I sprinted towards the sound, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst into a small clearing to find a young woman backing away from the tree line, her face pale with terror. And there, half hidden behind a massive pine, was the creature. It had grown since I'd last seen it. Its limbs were longer, its body more muscular. But those eyes, those bottomless black eyes, were the same. For a moment where we're locked in a silent standoff, then moving faster than should have been possible, the Pale Stalker lunged toward the woman. Without thinking, I threw myself between them, my hand fumbling for the canister of bear spray on my belt. I caught the creature full in the face with the spray. It let out an unearthly shriek and recoiled, giving me just enough time to grab the woman's arm and run. We didn't stop until we reached my patrol vehicle. The woman sobbed hysterically beside me as I radioed for backup. In the aftermath of that incident, it It became impossible to keep the pale stalker a secret. The woman's account, combined with the evidence Earl and I had gathered, forced the Park Service to acknowledge that there was something out there. They stopped short of confirming the existence of a cryptid, instead issuing vague warnings about an unidentified predator in the area. The summer brought a team of wildlife biologists and cryptozoologists to the park, all eager to catch a glimpse of the creature that was fast becoming a local legend. Despite their high-tech equipment and round-the-clock surveillance, they found little concrete evidence. When Earl and I knew the truth, we'd seen it, faced it, and we knew it was far more intelligent and dangerous than anyone suspected. As fire approached once again, marking a year since our first encounter in the cave, the sightings and incidents began to increase. It was as if the pale stalker knew we were onto it and was ramping up its activities in response. We found more of those strange trees with carved symbols scattered throughout the park. Hikers reported feeling watched, hearing strange noises, catching glimpses of a pale figure flitting between the trees. Then, in late September, disaster struck. A group of 5 campers went missing near Green River Trail. The ensuing search was the largest in the park's history, involving park rangers, local law enforcement, and volunteers from nearby towns. For days, we combed the forests, calling out names, checking every cave and crevice. On the 4th day of the search, we found them, or rather what was left of them. They'd been changed. Their bodies were pale and elongated, their eyes dark pits. They moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, and they attacked the search party with inhuman strength and ferocity. In the chaos that followed, shots were fired, people were injured, and the creatures that had once been human disappeared into the forest. As we regrouped, trying to make sense of what we'd seen, a horrible realization dawned on me. The pale stalker wasn't just killing people, it was transforming them, creating more of its kind. The park was closed indefinitely after that incident. The official story cited environmental hazards and dangerous wildlife, but rumors spread quickly. The pale stalker, once a local legend, became national news. Crazy theories abounded, ranging from government experiments gone wrong to alien invasions. Through it all, Earl and I remained at our posts. This was our home, our responsibility. We'd seen the birth of this nightmare, and we were determined to see it through to its end, whatever that might be. As I sit here now writing this account, I can hear the wind howling outside my cabin. Winter is coming again, and with it a new chapter in our ongoing struggle with the stalker. Well, we're prepared now, more knowledgeable about our adversary, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still woefully outmatched. I don't know what the future holds for our park, for the creature that haunts its shadows, or for those of us sworn to protect this land and its visitors. But I do know this, the world is stranger and more dangerous than most people realize. There are things out there in the dark places between civilization that defy explanation or understanding. So if you're reading this, take it as a warning. Respect the wilderness, but never forget that it doesn't always respect you back. And if you ever find yourself in a forest, any forest, and feel eyes upon you or hear something moving in the underbrush that doesn't sound quite natural, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero, just turn around, head back to safety, and count yourself lucky, because out there in the shadows of the ancient trees, something is watching, something is waiting, and it's hungry. This is Donald Taylor, Park Ranger, signing off. Stay safe out there, folks. And remember, not all monsters are myths. As the years passed, our struggle with the pale stalker evolved. What had begun as a terrifying encounter in a remote cave had grown into a full-scale war for the survival of our park and the surrounding communities. The creature or creatures, for we were never quite sure how many there were, became bolder, venturing closer to populated areas. 5 years after our initial encounter, I found myself in a position I never expected. leading a task force dedicated to studying and containing the pale stalker threat. Our team was a mix of park rangers, wildlife biologists, anthropologists, and even a few cryptozoologists who had managed to prove their worth. Earl, despite his advancing age, remained my steadfast second-in-command. We set up a research station in the old ranger headquarters, transforming it into a high-tech command center. Monitors displayed feeds from cameras hidden throughout the park, while banks of computers analyzed data from motion sensors, infrared detectors, and other specialized equipment. It was a far cry from the simple tools we'd had when this all began. Dr. Sarah Chen, our lead biologist, had made some startling discoveries about the pale stalker's physiology. From the scant physical evidence we managed to collect, shed skin, hair samples, and similar ones, she determined that the creature possessed a remarkable ability to adapt to its environment. "It's like nothing I've ever seen," she explained during one of our briefings. "Its DNA seems to be in a constant state of flux, allowing it to evolve in real time to overcome obstacles or threats." This explained how it had survived in our changing climate, and why our initial attempts to trap or tranquilize it had failed. It was learning, adapting, always one step ahead of us. But we were learning too. We discovered that certain frequencies of sound seemed to disorient the creatures, and they had an aversion to a particular type of ultraviolet light. These findings allowed us to develop new tools and strategies for protecting ourselves and the park's visitors. Not that we had many visitors these days. The park had been officially reopened 2 years after the incident with the transformed campers, but tourism had never fully recovered. Those who did come were a hardier sort, thrill seekers and cryptid hunters mostly. We did our best to keep them safe, but there were always those who ignored the warnings, venturing into restricted areas in hopes of catching a glimpse of the infamous pale stalker. Sometimes they never came back. One crisp autumn morning, about 7 years into our ordeal, I was out on patrol with Mike, one of our younger rangers. He was a good kid, eager to learn and unflappable in the face of danger. We were checking some remote sensors when Mike suddenly held up his hand, signaling me to stop. "You hear that?" he whispered. I listened intently. At first, all I could hear was the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I caught it, a faint rhythmic thumping like something heavy moving through the underbrush. And underneath that, a sound that made my blood run cold. A low guttural clicking that I'd come to associate with the pale stalker. We radioed for backup and began to move cautiously toward the sound. As we crept through the dense forest, the noise grew louder. We came to the edge of a small clearing, and what I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my days. 3 pale stalkers, the largest I'd ever seen, were gathered around a freshly killed deer. But they weren't eating it. Instead, they seemed to be changing it. As we watched in horror, the deer's body began to twist and elongate, its fur falling away to reveal pale, mottled skin. It let out a small gasp, and suddenly 3 pairs of black, empty eyes were fixed on us. What followed was a chaotic blur of motion and sound. Mike fired his tranquilizer gun, hitting one of the creatures in the chest. It staggered but didn't go down. I sprayed the area with our UV lights, causing them to recoil and shriek. We ran the creatures in hot pursuit. I could hear Mike panting beside me, hear the crack of branches as the pale stalkers crashed through the forest behind us. We burst out onto one of the main trails, and I risked a glance back. The creatures were gaining on us, moving with a speed that defied their awkward appearance. Just as I thought we were done for, the cavalry arrived. Earl came roaring up in one of our ATVs, a modified sound cannon mounted on the back. He fired it up, filling the air with a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The effect on the pale stalkers was immediate and dramatic. They writhed in apparent agony, clawing at their heads before retreating into the forest. As the sound faded, I leaned against a tree, my heart pounding. "Cutting it a bit close there, weren't you?" I gasped at Earl. He grinned. though I could see the worry in his eyes. Thought I'd add a little excitement to your morning stroll. That incident marked a turning point in our understanding of the Pale Stalkers. We now knew they could transform other living creatures, not just humans. This raised terrifying possibilities that had their potential to spread and adapt. Dr. Chen theorized that this ability might be how they reproduced, creating new members of their species from existing life forms. The next few years were a blur of research, close encounters, and increasingly desperate attempts to contain the threat. We developed new weapons and defenses, but for every advance we made, the Pale Stalkers seemed to adapt. They grew more intelligent, more organized. We began to find evidence of rudimentary tools at their kill sites, and their hunting patterns became more strategic. 10 years after my first encounter in the cave, we made a breakthrough that would change everything. Dr. Chen and her team, analyzing soil samples from areas of frequent Pale Stalker activity, discovered traces of an unknown fungal organism. Another research revealed that this fungus shared some genetic similarities with the Pale Stalkers themselves. "I think I found the missing link," Dr. Chen announced excitedly. This fungus could be the original life form that the Pale Stalkers evolved from, or more likely it's a symbiotic organism that facilitates their transformative abilities. This discovery led to a new approach in our containment efforts. We began developing a targeted fungicide that we hoped would inhibit the Pale Stalkers' ability to transform themselves and other creatures. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead we'd had in years. As we worked on this new strategy, the situation in and around the park continued to deteriorate. Sightings of Pale Stalkers became more frequent in nearby towns. People began to leave the area, and those who stayed lived in constant fear. The government, finally forced to acknowledge the reality of the situation, established a quarantine zone around the park and surrounding forest. It was around this time that I started to notice changes in myself. At first, I dismissed it as stress and lack of sleep, but as the weeks went by, I couldn't ignore the signs. My eyesight was sharper, especially at night. My hearing had become more acute, and sometimes when I was alone in the forest, I could swear I heard whispers, voices just on the edge of comprehension. I kept these changes to myself, afraid of what they might mean. But observant as ever, I noticed something was off. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the old ranger station, he finally confronted me. "How long have you been changing, Braden?" he asked quietly. I started to deny it, but the look in his eyes stopped me. "I don't know. I admit, a few months maybe." Earl sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. "I think you've been infected, for lack of a better word, that night in the cave maybe, or during one of your encounters since then." Am I turning into one of them? The thought filled me with horror. Earl shook his head. "I don't think so, not completely anyway. I've been watching you and I've seen others who've changed. This is different. It's like you're evolving, but still you." We sat in silence for a long while, watching the sun set over the forest. Finally, I spoke. "What do we do now?" "We keep fighting," Earl said firmly, "and we use whatever advantages we can get. If you're changing, maybe you can understand them better. Maybe you can help us find a way to stop them." Over the next year, we worked tirelessly on our fungicide strategy while I learned to cope with my ongoing changes. My senses continued to sharpen, and I found that I could move through the forest with an ease and silence that unnerved even our most experienced rangers. Most disturbingly, I began to sense the presence of the Pale Stalkers, almost like a sixth sense. Dr. Chen monitored my condition closely, running countless tests and scans. "Your DNA is changing," she told me one day, her voice a mix of scientific fascination and personal concern. "But it's not like the full transformations we've seen. It's more like an optimization. Your body is adapting to the environment in ways that go beyond normal human limits. As unsettling as these changes were, they proved invaluable in our fight against the Pale Stalkers. I could track them more effectively than any of our technology, sensing their movements and even to some degree their intentions. It was through this new sense that I first realized they were planning something big. It was a crisp morning in late fall, nearly 12 years after this all began, when I felt it. A gathering, a concentration of pale stalker presence unlike anything I'd experienced before. They were converging on a location deep in the heart of the forest, drawn by some call that I could sense, but not quite hear. I assembled a team immediately. Earl, Mike, Dr. Chen, and a handful of our best rangers, geared up with our latest weapons and protective equipment. As we made our way through the forest, I could feel the pull growing stronger. Whatever was drawing the pale stalkers was affecting me too. We found them in a massive clearing that none of us had ever seen before. Hundreds of pale stalkers, more than we'd ever encountered in one place, gathered around an enormous twisted tree. The tree's bark was covered in the same strange symbols we found carved in caves and on smaller trees throughout the forest. At its base was a pulsing mass of the fungus Dr. Chen had identified years ago. As we watched from the edge of the clearing, the mass began to move and grow. Pale elongated limbs emerged from it, followed by a torso, and finally a head. The pale stalkers let out a collective cry that was part celebration, part hunger. "My God," Dr. Chen whispered. "It's birthing a new one. Maybe a leader." I could feel the power emanating from this new creature. It was ancient, intelligent, and filled with a cold alien hunger that made my skin crawl. As it fully formed and rose to its full height, easily twice that of the other pale stalkers, its black eyes swept the clearing and fixed directly on our hiding spot. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a leader, this was the origin, the first of its kind. And it had been here, dormant perhaps, long before humans had ever set foot in this forest. Our presence, our intrusion into its domain, had awakened it. What followed was the most harrowing battle of our long war. We fought with everything we had: sound cannons, UV lights, experimental weapons, and our fungicide bombs. The pale stalkers came at us in waves, driven by the psychic commands of their leader. I found myself face to face with the leader itself, my heightened abilities allowing me to match its speed and strength to some degree. As we grappled, I felt the invasive presence in my mind, flashes of alien thoughts and memories. I saw the creature's history, its arrival on Earth eons ago, its long dormancy, and its awakening as humanity expanded into its territory. In that mental connection, I also sensed its weakness. The fungus wasn't just a tool or symbiote, it was an integral part of the pale stalker's biology. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I triggered the release on all the fungicide bombs I was carrying. The clearing filled with a fine mist. The effect on the pale stalkers was immediate and dramatic. They began to writhe and shriek, their bodies seemingly unable to maintain their form. The leader let out a psychic howl of rage and pain that brought me to my knees. As the fungicide did its work, the pale stalkers began to disintegrate, their bodies breaking down into the same fungal mass they had emerged from. The leader held out the longest, its form fluctuating as it struggled against the inevitable. In its final moments, it locked eyes with me one last time. I felt a mix of emotions flood through our connection: rage, fear, and, most surprisingly, begrudging respect. Then, it was over. Where hundreds of pale stalkers had stood, there was now only a field of rapidly disintegrating fungal matter. The strange tree shuddered and collapsed in on itself, leaving behind a smoking crater. We had won, but the cost had been high. Many of our team were injured, and the forest itself seemed to have been fundamentally changed by the battle. As we made our way back to headquarters, I could feel my own connection to the pale stalkers fading. The changes in me weren't reversing, but the alien presence in my mind was gone. In the years that followed, we worked to ensure the threat was truly gone. We developed methods to detect and neutralize any remaining traces of the pale stalker fungus. Slowly, cautiously, life in and around the park began to return to normal. But I knew, as did Earl and the others who had been there from the beginning, that things would never be quite the same. We had glimpsed a truth about our world and our place in it that could not be unseen. The forests, the dark and wild places of the earth, held secrets and dangers beyond our imagining. As I stand here now, an old man looking out over the forest I've protected for so long, I can still feel echoes of that connection to the pale stalkers. It reminds me to remain vigilant, to never take the peace and safety we've achieved for granted. For those who come to the park now, drawn by its beauty and the lingering rumors of its strange history, I have this advice: respect the wilderness, enjoy its wonders, but never forget that beyond the reach of your campfire's light, in the depths of the forest and the shadows between the trees, there may be things watching, things waiting. Not all of them are as benign as we'd like to believe, and not all monsters are myths. This is Donald Taylor, park ranger, a survivor and guardian of the borderlands between the known and the unknown, signing off for the last time. Remember my story and stay safe out there in the wild places of the world. It was the summer of 1959, and the Nevada desert was as unforgiving as ever. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth, creating shimmering mirages on the horizon that teased with false promises of water and respite. In this harsh landscape, I found myself driving a beat-up Chevrolet, its faded blue paint a poor match for the relentless sky above. My name is Douglas Carter. Ask my friends if I had any left. Once upon a time, I had been a promising young man with dreams of making it big in the bustling city of Las Vegas. Now at 35, I was nothing more than a door-to-door vacuum salesman, peddling dreams of cleanliness to people who could barely afford to put food on their tables. The car's radio crackled with static, occasionally catching snippets of news about the ongoing Cold War tensions or the latest rock and roll sensation. I paid it little mind, focused instead on the dusty road ahead and the gnawing emptiness in my gut. It had been days since my last sale, and the meager commissions were drying up faster than a puddle in this godforsaken desert. As I approached yet another nameless town, little more than a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled together against the vast expanse of nothing, I couldn't help but wonder how I'd ended up here. Was it the gambling debts, the broken marriage, or just a series of bad decisions that had snowballed into this pitiful existence? The town's welcome sign, if you could call it that, was barely legible beneath years of dust and neglect. "Welcome to Coyote's Rest," it proclaimed half-heartedly. "Population who knows, who cares." I certainly didn't, but desperation has a way of making a man do things he'd rather not. I pulled up to the first house on the outskirts of town, a ramshackle affair with peeling paint and a porch that sagged like the shoulders of a defeated man. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my sample case from the passenger seat and steeled myself for another rejection. The door creaked open before I could even knock, revealing a weathered face framed by gray hair and deep wrinkles. The old woman eyed me suspiciously, one hand hidden behind the door, likely clutching a shotgun if my experiences in these parts were anything to go by. "Ma'am," I began, plastering on my best salesman smile. "I'm Douglas Carter, representing the finest in home cleaning technology. Might I interest you in a demonstration of our revolutionary new vacuum cleaner?" She snorted, a sound somewhere between amusement and disgust. "Boy, does this look like the kind of place that needs one of your fancy city contraptions. We sweep our floors with brooms around here, just as we always have." I opened my mouth to argue, to make my pitch about the wonders of modern convenience, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Save your breath, son. Ain't nobody in this town got money for such foolishness. Best move along before you waste any more of your time or hours." The door slammed shut with finality that echoed through my empty stomach. I trudged back to my car, the weight of the sample case seeming to increase with each step. As I tossed it onto the back seat, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, doubled cheeks, and a weariness that seemed burned deep. When had I become this hollow shell of a man? I drove through the town's single main street, taking in the sorry sights. A general store with faded advertisements for products that had gone out of fashion years ago. A post office that looked like it hadn't seen a letter in decades. And at the far end, perched on the edge of town like a sentinel guarding the border between civilization and wilderness, stood a lone bar. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the fading daylight, proclaiming itself the Rusty Spur in letters that had seen better days. It was the kind of place that promised cold beer and hot gossip, a refuge for lost souls and weary travelers. In other words, it was exactly what I needed. I pulled into the dusty parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. As I cut the engine, the silence of the desert seemed to press in around me, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. For a moment I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, wondering if this was rock bottom or if I still had further to fall. With a sigh, I pushed open the car door and stepped out into the sweltering heat. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I had been in any mood to appreciate them. Instead, I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, making my way toward the promise of temporary oblivion that lay behind those swinging doors. As I reached for the handle, a gust of wind kicked up, sending a cloud of dust swirling around me. In just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow flicker at the edge of my vision, nothing dark and ominous, like the silhouette of a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there but the empty expanse of the desert. Shaking off the strange feeling, I pushed open the door and stepped into the dim interior of the Rusty Spur. The smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hit me like a wall, a familiar comfort that spoke of countless nights spent trying to drink away my troubles. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I took in the sparse decor, a few rickety tables, a jukebox in the corner playing a melancholy country tune, and a long bar stretching along one wall. Behind that bar stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from the very rock of the surrounding mountains. Tall and broad-shouldered, with arms thick as tree trunks, and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl. He was polishing a glass with a rag that had seen better days, his movements mechanical as if he'd been performing the same task for eternity. I made my way to the bar, the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The bartender's eyes flicked up to me, then back to his tasks, showing about as much interest as one might in a passing tumbleweed. "Follow me," he grunted, not bothering with pleasantries. "Here," I replied, sliding onto a bar stool that protested my weight with an ominous groan, whatever's coldest. He nodded once, setting aside the glass and reaching for a bottle. As he popped the cap and placed it in front of me, I couldn't help but ask, "Say, you wouldn't happen to know anyone in town looking for a top-of-the-line vacuum cleaner, would you?" The bartender's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. The most emotion I'd seen from him yet. "Vacuum salesman, huh? Tough break, kid. Funk around here ain't much for modern conveniences. I'd still use brooms if they bothered to clean it all." I sighed, taking a long pull from my beer. It was lukewarm and tasted vaguely of metal, but it was wet, and that was good enough for now. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that impression. Any other towns nearby that might be more receptive?" He shook his head slowly. "The nearest place of any size is about 100 miles east, and I wouldn't count on them being any more interested in what you're selling. Times are tough all over." I nodded, feeling the weight of my failures pressing down on me. "Well, thanks anyway. Guess I'll just enjoy my beer and be on my way." As I nursed my drink, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The bar wasn't empty. There were a few other patrons scattered about, hunched over their own drinks or engaged in low conversations. But none of them seemed to be paying me any mind. It wasn't until I glanced towards the back of the room that I spotted her. Sitting alone in a darkened booth, a woman who seemed entirely out of place in this dusty, forgotten corner of the world. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with blonde hair that caught what little light there was and seemed to glow. Her face was partially hidden in shadow, but I could make out full lips painted a deep red and eyes that sparkled with something. Interest? Amusement? It was hard to tell from this distance. She must have noticed me staring because she raised her glass in a small salute, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I felt a flutter in my chest, a sensation I hadn't experienced in longer than I cared to admit. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my beer and made my way over to her table. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, trying to summon up some of that charm that had served me so well in my younger days. She gestured to the empty seat across from her with a languid wave of her hand. "Do my guest, stranger. It's not often we get new faces around here." I slid into the booth, noticing as I did so that her dress was of a quality you didn't often see in these parts. Silky and form-fitting, more suited to a Vegas showgirl than a small-town bar patron. "Doug Carter," I introduced myself, extending a hand across the table. She took it, gripped surprisingly firm. "Pleasure to meet you, Doug. I'm Veronica Late." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Like the movie star?" A shadow passed over her face, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Something like that," she said with a wry smile. "So, Doug, what brings you to our little slice of paradise?" I launched into my usual spiel about being a traveling salesman, talking up the virtues of the latest in vacuum technology. Even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow, rehearsed. Veronica listened politely, nodding in all the right places. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't buying it any more than the rest of the town. "Sounds like a tough gig," she said when I'd finally run out of steam. "Especially out here, people in these parts tend to be set in their ways." I sighed, taking another swig of my now warm beer. "You're telling me I haven't made a sale in weeks, starting to wonder if I shouldn't just pack it in and head back to the city." Veronica leaned forward, her eyes suddenly intense. "Hell, what's waiting for you back there, Doug? A mountain of debt, an ex-wife, or just more disappointment?" I blinked, taken aback by her perceptiveness. "Did you?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Lucky guess you've got that look about you. A man running from something, even if he doesn't know what it is yet." I wanted to argue to defend myself, that the words stuck in my throat, because deep down I knew she was right. I'd been running for so long I'd forgotten what it was like to stand still. "Tell you what," Veronica said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "How about we get out of here? I know a place not far from town. It's quiet, private, we could talk more freely there." Warning bells should have been going off in my head. This was the kind of offer that led to men waking up in ditches, robbed blind, or worse. But something in her eyes, a mixture of promise and danger, had me nodding before I could think better of it. "Sure," I heard myself say, "lead the way." As I stood to leave, I caught the bartender's eye. He was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it concern or something closer to pity? But before I could dwell on it, Veronica had grabbed my hand and was pulling me toward the exit. The night air hit us like a slap in the face as we stepped outside. The temperature had dropped considerably, and a chill wind was blowing in from the east, carrying with it the promise of a storm. In the distance, lightning flickered on the horizon, briefly illuminating the vast emptiness of the desert. "My car's over here," Veronica said, leading me toward a sleek black Cadillac that looked as out of place in this dusty parking lot as she did. "Hope you don't mind if I drive." I shook my head, still trying to process the sudden turn my evening had taken. As we approached the car, that feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the bartender or one of the other patrons following us out. But the parking lot was empty, save for my own beat-up Chevy and Veronica's Cadillac. And yet, there at the edge of the lot, where the light from the bar's neon sign faded into darkness, I could have sworn I saw movement. A shadow darker than the surrounding night seemed to detach itself from the gloom. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. "Doug, you coming?" Veronica's voice snapped me back to reality. I turned to find her already seated behind the wheel, the engine purring to life. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Lack of sleep and too much cheap beer, that's all it was. Had to be. With one last glance at the now empty edge of the parking lot, I climbed into the passenger seat. As we pulled out onto the empty highway, the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the windshield. Veronica flicked on the wipers, humming softly to herself as she navigated the darkened road with practiced ease. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, still not quite believing my luck, or was it something else? An nagging doubt began to gnaw at the edges of my mind, whispering that this was all too convenient, too good to be true. So I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "You never did tell me what brings you to a place like Coyote's Rest. Not exactly a tourist destination." Veronica's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, you know how it is," she said. "That sometimes a girl just needs to get away from it all. Find herself or lose herself, whichever comes first." It was a non-answer, and we both knew it. But before I could press further, she suddenly jerked the wheel, sending us onto a narrow dirt road I hadn't even noticed in the darkness. "Shortcuts," she explained, though I hadn't asked. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the dirt to mud that sucked at the tires. In the distance, thunder rumbled ominously. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The desert landscape gave way to rocky outcroppings, their jagged silhouettes visible in brief flashes of lightning. Finally, Veronica brought the car to a stop in front of what looked like the entrance to an old mine shaft. "We're here," she announced, killing the engine. I peered out through the rain-streaked windshield, confusion and unease battling for dominance in my gut. "And where exactly is here?" Veronica turned to face me, and in that moment, I saw something in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't malice exactly, but a kind of cold determination that made me suddenly acutely aware of how isolated we were. "It's a place where people come to make deals, Doug," she said, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "A place where a man can change his fortune if he's willing to pay the price." I reached for the door handle, my instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this woman and this place as possible. But before I could move, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the scene outside the car. And there, standing in front of the mine entrance, was the figure I'd glimpsed earlier, tall and imposing, rainwater streaming off the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his long coat. As I watched, frozen in terror, he slowly raised his head. In the next flash of lightning, I saw his eyes and my world shattered. They weren't human eyes at all, but deep, oily pools of blackness that seemed to swallow what little light there was. Veronica's hand clasped my arm, her grip inhumanly strong. "It's time, Doug," she said, her voice no longer that of the alluring woman I'd met in the bar. It had taken on an otherworldly quality, resonating with power that made my bones ache. "He's been waiting for you." I tried to pull away to open the door, to do anything but sit there paralyzed by fear, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if Veronica's touch had turned my muscles to stone. "Who? What are you?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Veronica's smile was all teeth now, sharp and predatory. "We are the collectors, Doug, the ones who come for souls that are ripe for the taking. And yours, my dear, yours has been ready for a long, long time." The figure outside the car began to move towards us, each step deliberate and unhurried. He didn't seem to care about the rain that was now coming down in sheets, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. You see, Doug, Veronica continued, her voice taking on a lecturer's tone. There are those in this world who are, shall we say, spiritually bankrupt. They've lost their way, their purpose. They drift through life causing pain to themselves and others, never realizing their true potential. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but deep down I knew she was right. How long had I been running? How many people had I hurt or disappointed along the way? That's where we come in, she said, gesturing to herself and the approaching figure. We offer a choice, a chance to start over, to become something more. The passenger side door creaked open, and I found myself face to face with the man in the hat. Up close, I could see that his skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. It was those eyes that held me transfixed. Bottomless pits that seemed to look right through me, laying bare every secret, every shame I'd ever tried to hide. Douglas Carter, he said, his voice like gravel being crushed underfoot. Your soul stands at a crossroads. Will you continue down this path of mediocrity and regret, or will you embrace a new destiny, one that offers power beyond your wildest dreams? I felt something break inside me then, all the years of failure, of running from my problems, of blaming everyone but myself. They came crashing down, leaving me hollow and raw. What do I have to do? I heard myself ask, the words coming unbidden to my lips. The man's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile on a human face. On him it looked like a wound opening. Simply take my hand, and all will be revealed. He extended his arm, pulled up, waiting. I stared at it, noticing the elongated fingers ending in sharp black nails that looked more like talons. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything but accept this devil's bargain. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered seductively, what do you have to lose? Your life is already a wreck. Why not take a chance on something extraordinary? With a shaking hand, I reached out and grasped his palm. His skin was cold, like touching a corpse, and I felt a jolt of something pass between us, a surge of energy that made my heart race and my vision blur. Excellent choice, the man said, his grip tightening painfully. Welcome to the family, Douglas, or should I say Crow. The world around me began to spin. Colors blurred and melted together. I heard Veronica laugh, a sound of pure wicked delight, and then everything went black. I woke to the sound of distant thunder, my head pounding as if I'd been on a 3-day bender. As I blinked away the fog of unconsciousness, I realized I was lying on a cold stone floor, the air around me damp and musty. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up to a sitting position and took in my surroundings. I was in what appeared to be a large cavern, dimly lit by flickering torches set into the rough-hewn walls. The space was filled with strange symbols carved into the rock, their edges glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Ah, you're awake, a familiar voice said from behind me. I turned to see Veronica emerging from the shadows, her appearance subtly altered. Her skin seemed to shimmer as if it wasn't quite solid, and her eyes now held the same inky blackness I'd seen in the man's. What happened? I asked, my voice rasping in my dry throat. Where am I? Veronica's laugh echoed off the cavern walls. You're home, Doug, or at least you will be once your transformation is complete. Transformation? I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see them changed into claws or covered in the scale, but they looked the same as always, calloused with a small scar on the right thumb from an accident with a box cutter years ago. It takes time, Veronica said, as if reading my thoughts. The physical changes are just the beginning. It's your soul that's truly being remade. As if on cue, a searing pain shot through my chest, causing me to double over in agony. It felt as if something was clawing its way out from inside me, tearing through flesh and bone. That would be the old dog dying, Veronica commented casually, watching my writhing with detached interest. Don't fight it. The more you resist, the more it hurts. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but no sound would come out. The pain intensified, spreading through my entire body until I was sure I would be consumed by it. And then just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I lay there on the cold stone, panting heavily, my body slick with sweat. But something was different. I felt lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "Stand up," Veronica commanded. To my surprise, I found myself obeying without hesitation. The body moved with a fluid grace I'd never possessed before. "How do you feel?" she asked, circling me slowly, her eyes raking over my form. I took a moment to consider the question. "I feel powerful," I said finally, and it was true. It was an energy thrumming through me, a sense of potential that I'd never experienced before. Veronica nodded, satisfied smile playing at her lips. "Good, that's just the beginning. Now it's time for your first lesson." She led me deeper into the cavern, past strange rock formations and bubbly pools of liquid that glowed with an eerie blue light. Finally, we emerged into a larger chamber where the man in the hat, my mysterious benefactor, stood waiting. "Welcome, Crow," he said, using the name he'd given me earlier. "Are you ready to embrace your new destiny?" I nodded, surprising myself with my eagerness. Whatever doubts or fears I had seemed to have burned away in the crucible of my transformation. "Excellent," he said, his black eyes gleaming in the torchlight. "Then let us begin." What followed was a crash course in abilities I never knew existed. I learned to step between shadows as easily as walking through a doorway, to hear the whispers of secrets carried on the wind, to see the threads of fate that bound all living things. But more than that, I learned about the true nature of the world, the hidden forces that shaped reality, the ancient bargains that kept the balance between light and dark. And I learned about my new role as a collector, one of the chosen few tasked with harvesting souls that had strayed too far from their intended paths. Days blended into nights, time losing all meaning in that subterranean realm. I don't know how long I spent there honing my newfound abilities under the tutelage of the man in the hat, whom I now knew simply as the Master, and Veronica. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, the Master declared me ready for my first solo mission. "There's a town not far from here," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "A man there has been causing great harm to those around him, squandering the gifts he was given. It's time for him to face judgment." I nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. This was what I had been reborn to do, to bring balance, to offer choices, to collect what was owed. "Remember," Veronica added, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, "you're not just taking a soul, you're offering redemption, a chance to start anew. Some will accept as you did, others, well, their fate is of their own making." With those final words of advice, I stepped into the shadows, allowing them to envelop me. When I emerged, I found myself standing on the outskirts of a small desert town, not unlike the one where my old life had ended and my new one had begun. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A warm breeze carried the scent of sage and dust, stirring memories of a past that already felt like it belonged to someone else. I reached up to adjust the brim of my hat, a fedora much like those worn by masters, which had appeared on my head the moment I'd left the cavern. My coat too seemed to have materialized from the shadows themselves, its dark fabric seeming to absorb the fading light. As I strode toward the town, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a store window. The face that looked back at me was both familiar and strange, my features sharper and my eyes holding a depth that spoke of secrets and power. I smiled, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw the flash of pointed teeth. Time to go to work, I thought, feeling the pulse of corrupted souls calling out to me. The crew has come to collect. The town of Redemption's End, an irony not lost on me, was like so many others I'd passed through in my former life. A collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled against the vastness of the desert, its inhabitants going about their lives oblivious to the forces that shaped their fates. As I walked down the dusty main street, I could feel the weight of curious stares. A stranger in a small town always drew attention, but there was something more to it now. Those gazes seemed to slide off me as if their minds couldn't quite grasp what they were seeing. I made my way to the local watering hole, a dingy establishment called the Last Call. It seemed as good a place as any to begin my search. As I pushed through the swinging doors, the buzz of conversation died away, replaced by a tense silence. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a beard that looked like it housed small animals, eyed me warily as I approached. "What'll it be, stranger?" he asked, his hand moving almost imperceptibly towards something beneath the bar. I smiled, allowing just a hint of my true nature to show through. "Information," I said, my voice carrying an echo of power that made the glasses behind him rattle slightly. "Looking for a man who's lost his way, one who's been causing pain to those around him." The bartender's eyes widened, and I could see the struggle playing out on his face, the instinct to protect one of his own warring with the primal fear my presence inspired. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes flicked briefly towards a table in the corner. I turned, following his gaze. There, hunched over a glass of amber liquid, sat a man who radiated an aura of misery and malice. Even from across the room, I could sense the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. As I approached, he looked up, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" he snarled, his words slurring slightly. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, ignoring the way other patrons edged away from our table. "Hello, Frank," I said, the name coming to me unbidden, carried on currents of knowledge I was only beginning to understand. He blinked, confusion momentarily replacing the anger on his face. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," I replied, allowing a hint of a smile to play at my lips. "But I know you, Frank. I know about the wife you beat, the children you've neglected. I know about the money you've stolen, the lives you've ruined, or your greed and your rage." Frank's face drained of color, his hand tightening around his glass until I thought it might shatter. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered, fear and defiance warring in his voice. I leaned forward, letting him see the truth in my eyes. "I'm the one who's come to offer you a choice, Frank, a chance to make things right." For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps regret or a longing for redemption, but it was quickly swallowed by a wave of anger. "I don't know what you're playing at," he growled, "but you'd better get out of here before I show you what happens to nosy strangers in these parts." I sighed, feeling a twinge of disappointment. I'd hoped, perhaps naively, that this first soul would choose the path of redemption. But I could see now that Frank's heart was too far gone, too mired in darkness to accept the chance I was offering. "I'm afraid that's not an option, Frank," I said, standing up. "Your time has come. The only question is whether you'll face your judgment with dignity or if we'll have to do this the hard way." Frank lunged at me then, his fist swinging in a wild arc, but I was no longer bound by the limitations of my old human form. I stepped aside with preternatural speed, watching as he stumbled past me. "The hard way it is then," I murmured. What followed was a chaos of breaking glass and overturned tables as Frank, blinded by rage and fear, lashed out at everything around him. The other patrons fled, their screams adding to the cacophony. Through it all, I moved with fluid grace, always just out of reach. I could have ended it at any time, but something in me wanted to give Frank every chance to choose a different path. Finally cornered and panting, Frank turned to face me. "What? What are you?" He gasped, his eyes wide with terror. I stepped forward, allowing the shadows to swirl around me. "I am judgment, Frank. I am the consequence of every choice you've made, every life you've destroyed." As the shadows enveloped us both, I reached out and placed my hand on Frank's chest. I could feel his corrupted soul pulsing beneath my palm, a twisted thing that writhed and fought against my touch. "Your time in this world is over," I said, my voice echoing with power. "But your journey is not yet complete. Where you go from here, that is up to you." With a final desperate cry, Frank's body crumpled to the floor. But in my hand, I held a swirling mass of energy, his soul stripped of its mortal shell. As I stepped back into the shadows, preparing to return to the cavern with my first collected soul, I caught sight of myself in a shattered mirror. My eyes glowed with an inner fire, and for a moment I thought I saw the ghostly outline of wings spreading from my shoulders. I had become something both more and less than human. I was Crow, the collector, the bringer of judgment, and the offer of redemption. And this, I realized, was only the beginning. As I emerged from the shadows into the now familiar cavern, the soul of Frank clutched in my spectral grasp. I was met by the approving gazes of the Master and Veronica. "Well done, Crow," the Master said, his black eyes glittering with satisfaction. "You've taken your first step into a larger world." Veronica circled me, her fingers trailing along my shoulders. "You had potential," she purred. "But even I didn't expect you to adapt so quickly." I should have felt pride at their praise, elation at my successful first mission. Instead, I felt hollow. The rush of power that had coursed through me during the confrontation with Frank had faded, leaving behind an annoying emptiness. "What happens to him now?" I asked, gesturing to the swirling mass of energy that represented Frank's soul. The Master waved his hand, and a shimmering portal appeared in the air beside him. "That is not for you to know, young Crow. Your job is to collect, to offer the choice. What comes after, that is the domain of powers far beyond even us." As he took the soul from me and cast it into the portal, I caught a glimpse of something, a realm of swirling mists and half-formed shapes, echoing with distant cries of anguish and ecstasy. The portal closed before I could make sense of what I'd seen, but the image lingered in my mind, raising questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. "You did well, Crow," Veronica said, her voice pulling me back to the present. "But this was just the beginning. There are many more souls out there waiting for judgment." I nodded, pushing down the unease that threatened to rise within me. This was my purpose now, wasn't it? To bring balance, to offer choices, to collect what was owed. "And yet something troubles you," the Master said, his eyes boring into me with unsettling intensity. I hesitated, unsure how to voice the doubt swirling in my mind. "It's just Frank. She didn't choose redemption. He didn't even seem to consider it. What if we're not really giving them a choice at all?" The Master's laugh was like gravel grinding beneath boots. "Oh, Crow, always they have a choice. That some choose poorly. Well, that is the nature of free will, is it not?" I wanted to argue, to point out that Frank had been so consumed by fear and anger that he couldn't possibly have made a rational decision. But I held my tongue, remembering Veronica's warnings about questioning the Master too directly. "Rest now," the Master said, his tone making it clear that the discussion was over. "Tomorrow, well, begin your real training." As I retreated to the small alcove that served as my quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, that there was more to this new existence than I was being told. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and filled with strange dreams. I saw faces, hundreds, thousands of them, all wearing expressions of terror and pleading. Among them I recognized Frank, his eyes now clear of the rage and hatred that had consumed him in life. He reached out to me, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding. The cavern was dark and silent, but I could have sworn I heard whispers echoing off the stone walls, fragments of pleas and accusations. What have I become? I wondered, staring into the darkness. And what price will I ultimately pay for this power? Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. With each soul I collected, my powers grew stronger, my understanding of the hidden world deeper. I learned to move through shadows across vast distances, to hear the thoughts of the living, to see the tangled web of fate that bound all souls. And yet, with each mission, the hollowness inside me grew. The faces from my dreams began to haunt my waking hours, their silent accusations weighing on me more heavily than any physical burden. It was during a routine collection in a small Midwestern town that everything changed. The target was Sarah, a former nurse who had fallen into addiction and begun stealing medication from the hospital where she worked. Her actions had led to patient deaths, marking her as a soul ripe for judgment. I found her in a rundown apartment, huddled on a stained mattress, her body racked with withdrawal. As I approached, shadows swirling around me, she looked up and I was struck by the clarity in her eyes. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. I knew someone would come eventually. I paused, thrown off balance by her calm acceptance. This wasn't how these confrontations usually went. "Know why I'm here?" I asked. As Sarah nodded, a sad smile playing at her cracked lips. "I've done terrible things," she said. "Unforgivable things. I deserve whatever punishment is coming to me. I should have felt triumph. This was the ideal scenario. A soul acknowledging its misdeeds, ready to face judgment. And yet, what if I found myself saying the words coming unbidden to my lips? What if there was another way, a chance to make amends, to set things right? Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of hope quickly extinguished. "Is that possible?" she asked. "After everything I've done?" In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of offering the usual choice between submission and futile resistance, I reached out and took Sarah's hand. "Come with me," I said, enveloping us both in shadows. We emerged in a small town hundreds of miles away, outside a clinic that specialized in addiction treatment. "This is your second chance," I told her, my voice thick with emotion, though I didn't fully understand it. "Use it wisely." Before she could respond, I stepped back into the shadows, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just done. When I returned to the cavern, I found the master waiting for me, his black eyes blazing with fury. "What have you done?" he thundered, the very walls of the cavern shaking with his rage. I stood my ground, a strange calm settling over me. "I offered a true choice," I said. "A real chance at redemption." The master's hand shot out, spectral claws wrapping around my throat. "You violated the most sacred laws of our kind," he hissed. "The balance must be maintained. A soul owed is a soul that must be collected." As I struggled in his grip, I saw Veronica emerge from the shadows, her expression unreadable. "You knew this day would come," she said to the master. He was always too human. The master's grip loosened slightly, allowing me to gasp out, "What do you mean?" Veronica's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Oh, Crow, did you really think you were special? That you were chosen, you were just another soul, one that took the easy way out when offered power?" The truth hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't a chosen one, imbued with divine purpose. I was just another link in a chain of corruption, perpetuating a cycle of pain and false choices. "No," I said, newfound strength flowing through me. "I won't be part of this anymore." I summoned every ounce of power I'd accumulated over the months, feeling it surge through my body. The shadows around me writhed and pulsed, responding to my will in a way they never had before. The master's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in determination. "You think you can defy us? We made you what you are." "No," I growled, feeling my form shift and change. Black feathers sprouted from my skin. I made myself. What followed was a babble that shook the very foundations of the underground realm. Shadow clashed against shadow, spectral energy crackling through the air. I fought with everything I had, driven by the faces of all those I'd condemned, all those had failed to truly help. In the end, it was Veronica who turned the tide. As the master prepared to strike a killing blow, she stepped between us, her own shadows merging with mine. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying a power I'd never heard before. "It's time for a change." The master howled in rage and disbelief, but it was too late. The combined force of our power overwhelmed him, reducing him to a swirling mass of formless energy. As the echoes of battle faded, I turned to Veronica, questions burning in my eyes. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "I'd been waiting centuries for someone like you, Crow. Someone who could see beyond the rigid laws we've clung to for so long." "What happens now?" I asked, feeling the weight of possibility pressing down on me. I had gestured to the cavern around us, to the portals that led to countless mortal realms. "Now we remake the system. We offer true redemption, true choices. It won't be easy, and there will be consequences we can't foresee. But it's time for a new way." As I stood there, my form still flickering between human and something else, I felt a sense of purpose flood through me. This was why I'd been brought into this world, not to blindly follow, but to challenge, change, and evolve. "Where do we start?" I asked, spreading wings that I was only now learning to control. Veronica's smile was both beautiful and terrible to behold. "We start with the truth, Crow. We go back to every soul you've collected, every life you've touched. We offer them a real choice, a real chance." I nodded, understanding the monumental task ahead of us. It wouldn't be easy. There would be those who resisted, who clung to the old ways. But for the first time since I'd taken the master's hand in that rain-soaked parking lot, I felt truly alive. As Veronica and I stepped into the shadows, preparing to reshape the very nature of cosmic justice, I spared a thought for Douglas Carter, the failed vacuum salesman, whose desperate choice had set all of this in motion. "I hope you can forgive me," I thought, "for what I've done and for what I'm about to do." Then we were gone, venturing into a future as uncertain as it was full of promise. Years passed in the mortal realm, though time held little meaning for beings like us. Veronica and I traveled between worlds, unraveling the complex web of souls and choices that the old system had created. We faced resistance, of course. Other collectors, beings who had grown comfortable with the old order, tried to stop us. But with each soul we freed, each life we touched, our power grew. We didn't offer easy redemption. That would have been another form of false choice. Instead, we created opportunities for genuine growth, for sincere atonement. Some souls embraced the chance, working tirelessly to right their past wrongs. Others rejected it, choosing to remain mired in their darkness. But always there was a choice, a real choice. I never forgot Sarah, the nurse whose quiet acceptance had sparked this revolution. We found her again years later, working at that same clinic where I'd left her. She had dedicated her life to helping others overcome their addictions, turning her past mistakes into a source of empathy and understanding. When she saw me, there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet recognition. "I always hoped you were real," she said, a smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "That I hadn't imagined you." I shook my head, marveling at the strength of the human spirit. "You didn't imagine me, Sarah, but you saved yourself. I just opened the door. As for me, I was no longer simply Crow, the collector. I'd become something new, a being that straddled the line between mortal and divine. My wings, now a permanent feature, were a reminder of how far I'd come from that desperate vacuum salesman in a Nevada desert town. Veronica remained by my side, her own nature evolving as we reshaped the cosmic order. We were partners, equals in our mission to bring true balance to the universe. But even as we worked to right the wrongs of the past, new challenges arose. The fabric of reality seemed not meant to be static. As we changed the rules, new complications emerged, unforeseen consequences of our actions that threatened the very balance we sought to create. And so our work continued, an eternal dance of correction and adaptation. We started down a path with no end in sight. I wouldn't have had it any other way. For in the end, isn't that what life and what comes after is all about? The constant struggle to grow, to improve, to make better choices. As I stand now looking out over a sea of souls, some bright with hope, others still shattered by doubt, I think back to that rainy night when a desperate man took a devil's bargain. I think of all the mistakes I've made and all the chances I've had to make things right. And I know with certainty that resonates through every fiber of my being that the choice to change, to strive for something better, is the most powerful force in all of existence. So to all those souls out there struggling with their own demons, fighting their own battles, I say this: your story isn't over, your choices still matter. And somewhere out there in the vastness of eternity, there's a being with black wings and eyes that have seen too much, rooting for you to find your way. Choose wisely, choose well, but above all, never stop choosing.